Alrighty. Well, hear me loud and clear? Working. Hopefully the space works.
Libertarian arguments and stuff. And then when I really was introduced to anarcho-capitalism and Murray Rothbard and all that, that was something that I struggled with immigration, not because I wanted closed borders, but I said, well, open borders just doesn't seem like something you'd want to do right away. It feels like that'd be the last thing that you'd abolish. But then kind of slowly had my mind changed on that, listening to people like Brian Kaplan and a few others that I interacted with that kind of gave me their perspective. And I think one thing ANCAPs we all would generally agree on is that this is an issue of private property versus public property, and we all agree on the end goal being a private property society. What we're dealing with in terms of the short term is, and this is what we talked about with Dave last night. I was like, what I don't, and when I'm done monologuing, maybe Zulu can come up and disagree with me and give me his take, but and I'd like to hear from others as well. But I've never really liked the argument that some people try to make that, well, the libertarian position is just open borders because open borders is just the government not doing anything. And I just don't think that's accurate. Even if, and for the longest time, and even today, it's nuanced. My position isn't really something I can just fit in a label. But even if I were to say open borders is preferable to closed borders, maybe it's like a net, the net least option, or like if we're calculating the total amount of aggression caused by open or closed borders, open might be the net positive in terms of the least amount of aggression committed. But it seems to me that if we're going to take a Misesian approach to this, right, a Rothbardian approach to this, we know that anytime the state does anything, it's corrupting the incentive structures, right? Just like I've been having this argument for the last 3 weeks now, and it's funny, like when I had my debate with Jack Lloyd, and then I had this conversation with Dave, and I've had interactions with people who disagree with Dave, who are very critical of him, and the accusation is often like, you're not engaging in a libertarian mindset, you're engaging in a Marxist mindset or a collectivist mindset, and I just, well, no, I think regardless of whether I was having a debate with Jack about Israel and Gaza or disagreeing with people about this borders discussion, I feel like I'm always starting from the same libertarian foundation of, we know that free markets work. We know that what free markets and human interactions are based on are, self-ownership, and then people are trading with each other based upon, calculations of their own personal subjective value judgments, and then making trades and transactions based on that. And free markets correct themselves and are able to generate all sorts of human flourishing because of the self-correction of market mechanisms. But then when the state interrupts these free market, mechanisms, like in the economy, whether it's through money printing, whether it's through, like entering into the market and monopolizing certain spheres of it, it's going to create malincentives. It's going to create distortions, which lead to malinvestments, which lead to people not making proper calculations in the economy. That leads to bubbles, which leads to crashes and all that. And so it's like, okay, same idea here when we're talking about immigration, I think. When we're talking about open versus closed borders, well, open borders is still a statist policy, because it's still, we're not in a private property society where there wouldn't be any such thing as a national border. and the movement of people wouldn't be influenced by the existence of these nation states and the existence of the welfare state and the existence of all the different interventions that the United States government is engaged in. So it's just, so anyway, I just don't think you can say that open borders is a absent of government action. It might be an absence in just the specific of, are they stopping people from coming across? That doesn't mean that then what results after that is just some sort of result of just, free market forces at play. So, and then in terms of,
Jesus.
the public property aspect of this, because, if Dave and I had more time to really just hash out what exact policy prescriptions we'd like to see, it's like I'm not against a lot of what he says in theory. I like the idea of, I agree with him in terms of, I don't think that just totally opening the border is necessarily either A, wise, or B, politically feasible. Nor do I want the border to be totally closed. And when I talked to Dave last night on the episode, I even asked him, where do you want it? I don't get the sense from you, Dave, that what you're advocating for is a complete shutdown of all immigration and no one can come here. He's like, no, we should have some people coming here. It would be bad for the economy and bad for the country if we shut immigration down to zero. So it's just a matter of, okay, well, where should it be? Now, I know that people are going to, hear me say that. They hear Dave say that. They go, well, hold on. You're, now you're not engaging in a libertarian mindset. You're engaging in a statist mindset. But again, that's why I started out by saying, no matter what we do with the border, open or closed, it's going to be a statist outcome. Now, if you don't want to engage in politics, then by all means, don't engage in politics. But for people like Dave and people like me, people in the Libertarian Party, we are engaging in politics. We are engaging with non-libertarians, and we're trying to have an influence on the Overton window. We're trying to have an influence on what people think about in terms of political solutions to problems at hand. So, an analogy I like to use is, we're trying to get to, let's say, in Kapistan, right? So we all agree on the end goal. And I promise I'll probably go another 5 more minutes, and then I see you requested to come up, Zulu. So after I'll try to finish up here and then bring you up, and we can have a little bit of a conversation and back and forth, and then anyone else can join in too. Because I feel like what people are objecting to is they're like, well, you're engaging in collectivism, and that's going to not lead people to embracing libertarianism because you're not advocating for libertarian solutions. You are engaging in sort of this statist game of trying to manipulate the way that the state governments are doing things, and that's just not going to work. So I would then ask, okay, well then how are we going to get from where we are now to even a minarchist state, let alone an anarchist private property society? It's kind of like, imagine if we're driving to Las Vegas, right? And we were having a discussion of what's the best route to get from, we're up in New Hampshire and we want to drive to Las Vegas. Well, no matter what route, I'm on the highway, there's road pirates going past me. If at any point I say we're going to take this route, well, you could at any point say, hold on, we're trying to get to Las Vegas and we're not there yet. That would be a weird objection to make to me if we're driving from New Hampshire and it's 4 hours in, we're in New York or Upper Pennsylvania, and then you go, you must be going the wrong way. This must be a terrible route because we're not there yet. And that's kind of what the arguments, that as silly as that sounds, that is how the arguments of some of these ANCAP purists sound, where they're like, oh, well, you're trying to play statist games. You're what you're advocating for isn't private property rights. It's like, well, of course it's not. we're, you know, think about the distance between New Hampshire and Las Vegas, and, you know, times that by like 1,000, and that's how far off we are as a society from, you know, the status quo to Ancapistan. We're nowhere close. So, I'm not going to make myself useless in the political arena by being an absolutist in terms of, well, you know, we're not going to make any, you know, policy prescriptions or compromises or advocate for anything that isn't just a pure, you know, end result of, you know, libertarian ideas taking over completely. Like, I just don't think that's how we're going to get there. We're going to have to, at some point, as a movement, accept that we're going to have to make, now, you know, we're going to have to make compromises. I would say they should be principled compromises. There are such a thing as unprincipled compromises or bad compromises, and it's a matter of trade-offs. This is what I said last night, like that great Thomas Sowell quote, there are no solutions, there's only trade-offs. And that's what we're dealing with here. If you don't want to do that, if you want to focus on philosophy and writing and all that, that's fine. But when you then try to pick fights with those of us who are willing to engage in politics and try to engage in more of an incremental path, try to meet people where they're at and move them 1 inch closer at a time to looking at the world through our lens, I just think that that's not helpful. So anyway, I'm very happy with how the conversation went with Dave. I agree with where his heart is at. I agree with him in terms of the analysis of public property and how we deal with that. So yeah.
All right, am I good to speak then?
Yes. So you heard me. I don't know how long you've been in the room and how much you heard of what I said, but you can go ahead and ask any question or make any comment you want to make.
Sure. So I think, would you agree that if it's something completely untouched, like, you know, there's vast swaths of like the Sierra Nevada, nobody's ever laid a finger on it, would you say that the state has a right to prevent people from getting there?
Yeah, so I mean, if we're talking about like, you know, somewhere in the desert or mountains or just like, you know, fields where the government claims they own this, or let's say it's, you know, it can get messy because a lot of these spaces are, if they're not government owned, there's a lot of unhomesteaded space that's owned by, you know, rich billionaires and corporations and, you know, real estate agencies and whatnot. And so there's two things there. One, would I have the same objection to people going up and like, you know, let's say like a homeless person or a group of people just in general going there? No, they're not. Them going there isn't going to create any tragedy of the commons. What it's going to do is, it might not be wise for them to go there because depending on who owns it, you know, that might not go well for them. So I'm not necessarily prescribing that is a good solution, but am I going to have a objection to it if one person or a group of people go to, you know, completely untouched, unhomesteaded land somewhere that either the government or some corporation claims they own, but they don't own through any sort of like libertarian. It's not only that they don't own it through libertarian, you know, means. It's not even like there's, again, completely untouched, unhomesteaded. Yeah, I'd say I don't think that is something that I'd have a huge objection to. At the very least, it's very different than what, you know, David and I are talking about when we're saying that there is homesteaded property that does have better or worse claims to the right to use when we're talking about things that, you know, aren't untouched, such as parks, schools, etc.
Okay, so then let's take the example of a park. Do you think anybody, let's say it's just like a state-run park, it's been state-run for its entire existence, you know, it wasn't expropriated from anybody, who do you think owns that park? It's either going to be one guy owns it, nobody owns it, or a group of people own it. So which of these options is it?
Yeah, well, I think we need to talk about, and I feel like Dave and I, although we might not have used the actual phrase group ownership in the conversation last night, but I know you were saying that you feel like we didn't adequately touch on the idea of group ownership. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your claim is that group ownership is logically incoherent or not possible. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, I mean, it doesn't quite make sense to me. I mean, even let's talk about just a pure private property based society. Like, how can you say there's no such thing as group ownership? Like, why couldn't my wife and I both own our house or both own a car, right? Like, we're two people, that's a group. I just don't understand how, like, before I can even answer your main question there, I just don't understand how they're, you know, by what argument you're saying that there's no such thing as property that is owned by two or more people.
Sure. So basically, the problem there is property rights are conflict avoiding norms. What it means to own something on day say means that you have the right to exclude people from it. Also, in Kinsell's words, you have the right to control that thing. It's all pointing at the same concept, right?
Yeah.
So if I own a stick, then I have the right to control it. I'm allowed to say what is done with that stick. So let's say there's a group of people, we'll call them A through Z, and we'll assume that they commonly own a stick. Now, it's very easy to resolve a conflict between somebody within this group, and then Bob comes along, and he wants to use a stick for something else. Clearly the group member would win there. But how do we resolve a conflict between A and B? Let's imagine that A wants to use a stick to spearfish, and B doesn't want this to happen. We have two options there. Either the spearfishing happens, or it doesn't. If the spearfishing should happen under our legal theory, that would contradict the assumption that B owns the stick, because he didn't want it to happen. So that option's out, because it's a contradiction. Okay, let's say the spearfishing shouldn't happen. Well, that would contradict the presumption that A owns the stick, because he should be allowed to control it. He should be allowed to use it for what he wants. So either option we have here contradicts the presumption that everybody in the set owns the stick. So how would you go about resolving that contradiction?
Yeah, I mean, I just think the hypothetical there is not how group ownership actually works in real life. So let's like a couple examples. One, let's say we have group ownership of a business, right? Well, because people can have like a joint ownership, like they go into business together. Well, what usually happens there is they have a contract. So the contract then lays out the terms of how both people are going to own it and how any disputes over said property of that business would be handled. They have a contract of how they're going to, you know, internally regulate and govern their exclusive control. That's not a contradiction there. Now, if you're talking about stuff that doesn't have a contract, well, that just means that we're talking about human relationships and not everything is always written down. Like, you know, my wife and I own our home, and like, you know, our name is on the deed, but that's a, you know, let's say we were just in Kapistan and we didn't even have a deed, so to speak. Let's just say it's like, you know, we had homesteaded land and we did the work together and we said we built this house from the ground up together. We both own it. And we didn't feel like we had the kind of relationship where we needed a, you know, 20-page contract to, you know, lay out how we're going to govern, you know, this group ownership. That what doesn't hold there, although you can get into like, well, what if there's a major problem in the relationship and then you guys are, oh, I want to do this with the house and I want to do this with the house. What that conflict does not then establish is that nobody owns it. It just means that it's that the people who own it are having a conflict over what to do with it, but it doesn't mean that they both don't have an exclusive compared to the people outside of the group.
Right.
So that's why I think that your logic there doesn't hold.
What the conflict does show, though, is that you can't resolve conflicts within the group, which is the entire purpose of property rights in the first place. And you're saying, well, they have like a contract. Let's say you even work it out entirely in a contract, right? But a contract theory is descendant from property theory. You don't have contract theory, and then on top of that, you have property theory. Property theory comes first. Otherwise, you have a stolen concept fallacy because contracts are contracts about property. You need to know what property is in the first place. So your contract theory of property just doesn't stand.
Yeah, I still don't get that. I don't see how that's a response to what I said. Again, I
Because
think
what you said was that you have a contract and that defines the
no,
terms of the group ownership.
I
The
said
contract is a
that was
contract
one
about
of
property. You can't have
that was
group
one
property come out of
example.
contracts.
Well, listen, we agreed that property. What makes property unique is that that an ownership of property. Sorry, the ownership aspect. What that means is that you have an exclusive right to use it.
Mm-hmm.
So all group ownership means is that, these two or these three people, they are the ones who have the exclusive right to use it compared to people who are not in the group. Just because the people in the group might come into a conflict of how to use it, then there's going to be, okay, if they have a contract that, I don't understand how your argument of, yes, contracts follow from the recognition of property, but how does that mean that I don't see how you're getting, that's a valid point, but what does that have to say in terms of why
Because
a contract would contradicts the idea of group ownership?
it means you can't just hand wave and say, well, they have a contract which says, let there be group ownership, and then suddenly there's group ownership. That doesn't work. A contract defines a transfer of title from one guy to another guy. That's all a contract does.
What gives them the ownership isn't the contract. The contract is just stating the terms of how that it might say how they acquired the property, if it was traded for or whatever. But then it might also, a contract between three people in terms of, hey, this is a piece of property that we don't want to just have the management be sort of like laissez-faire, not spelled out. We're going to spell out the terms of our how we're going to manage this property that all three of us own. That is in no way in conflict with the idea that they are the ones who, or to put it another way, that no one else outside of that group has a right to use that property.
Right, but how are you resolving conflicts within the group? It's easy enough to resolve conflicts from a group between a group member and a non-group member. That's the easy case. But how do you resolve the hard case of between group members? Because you don't have property rights within the group. So how do you resolve that?
It depends on the nature of the dispute, how many people are involved, and what kind of property that we're talking about again. But what never happens at the end of them trying to resolve how their differences, there's no scenario in which suddenly they go, oh, actually, no one owns this, or it's owned by everybody, or really only one person owned it.
Sure, just give me one example of where they stick Crusoe and Friday, or A and B. A wants to use it to spearfish, B doesn't want this to happen. Give me an example of how you could have a coherent group property system there, and how you would resolve that conflict.
The idea of a group ownership of a stick is rather silly.
I agree.
Not all types of property are the types of property that are going to in free market human interactions become collectively owned. But things like houses, so
like a house, cars, it's not a stick, it's a house. A wants to paint it a different color, B doesn't want it painted a different color. How do you resolve that conflict?
That's not my problem. I mean, unless it's me and my wife, in which case,
but can your property theory solve the conflict there?
You resolve it based up, again. You need to be more specific, because are we talking about a house that's being used by business? Are we talking about a house that's owned by a married couple? Is there a contract or not?
Well, I'm asking you because I don't think there's any way to resolve this conflict. So I want you to just pick the easiest way to explain about how you could resolve this conflict. How you could denote who is the proper user of the house and who isn't. So in 99% of cases when people decide to own a house together, they are the type of people who are going to find a way to come to an agreement about things like, let's say they can't,
colors to paint the walls.
They can't come to an agreement this time. How do you resolve that conflict?
Well, I mean, the conflict is eventually going to be resolved. Either one person is going to relent and say, fine, paint it this color, or the person who wants to paint it a color will relent and say, no, I won't paint it this color. So
So do you think
resolve
conflicts
itself
are
one way
impossible?
or another.
Are conflicts just per se impossible because somebody at some point
No,
somebody's
you
just going to
can
go,
have
oh well,
conflicts.
fine, I'll let you do it. I'll let you have sex with me, back alley bum. It's all right. Like, no, clearly conflicts can happen.
Well,
It's not the case that people always relent.
Let's say let's say it's me and my wife, and let's say my wife asks me, I want to paint the walls red, and I go, no, that's a hideous color. And let's say she goes ahead and paints it red without me. It's like, against my wishes. It's like, okay.
But she wants to, right? So let's say she does indeed really want to paint it red. She really wants to paint it red, and you really hate red. How do you resolve that conflict? Does it get painted red or not? Should it get painted red or not? In your legal theory, how do you resolve that?
Well, there would be no. I can't go to a judge and say my wife owes me restitution because she painted my house red. Like there's been no theft of property, and
But there was a
especially
conflict.
Right, but the conflict is over the property. It doesn't mean that there's not ownership of the property.
Right, but
again,
who
like
owns it? There is a conflict, I agree. Who owns it?
No, there's no conflict over who owns it. It's me and my wife.
No. There is a conflict, and the way you resolve conflicts is by saying, okay, this person is the owner, and this person isn't the owner. That's how you resolve conflicts.
Zulu, have you ever been in a long-term relationship?
No.
Okay. Because that.
Now, do you have a way to resolve this conflict at all? Or does your property theory just not apply here?
It's the way that most people resolve conflicts in society, which is that they come to a reasonable agreement. If people were so unreasonable...
Law isn't studying...
Listen, Zulu. If people were so unreasonable that the idea of, oh my gosh, we don't know how to resolve the conflict of what color to paint the walls, if that was enough to be like, well, two people can't collectively own property because of that conflict, then Ancapistan and self-governance would be impossible. Okay? People are not that unreasonable.
Right, so law isn't studying those scenarios where people come to an agreement and they come to a reasonable resolution and everybody's agreeing on how they should use things. Law studies those scenarios where people don't agree, where there's a conflict.
Right, but this isn't,
so you don't try and solve the case where everybody agrees on how to do it. I want you to solve the case of where they don't agree, where there's a conflict, where you're coming to blows over your wife trying to paint it red and you're trying to slap the paintbrush overhand. Who is in the right there?
In a legal sense, neither of us is in the right or wrong because that's not a legal
case. Okay, so neither of you own it.
No, we own it. Listen, not everything
but neither of you is allowed to control it.
Zulu, not everything that happens is a legal battle or a case of,
I agree,
of legality.
But this is, because there's a conflict. Law studies conflicts.
No, there's no, when you have ownership over property and you're doing it collectively. Now, listen, if two people own a property, that is more sophisticated and complicated than a single person owning property. But that doesn't mean that they don't own the property.
But how do you resolve the conflict?
There are many ways that humans resolve conflict, and that is up to those people to find a way to resolve it.
No, it's up to you, because you assert that this is a coherent concept within your property theory. I want to hear how.
No, but Zulu, you're describing a hypothetical without specifics, and then asking for a specific resolution.
No, I'm asking you, come up with the hypothetical you want to show that group property can indeed occur. Right, you came up with, you wanted it to change from a stick to a house. Okay, whatever, it can be a house. Right, so how do you resolve that? Right. We're assuming there's a conflict here over the house. How do you resolve a conflict over the house? Not you and your wife agree on how to paint the house. There's a conflict. You disagree. How do you resolve that?
This is silly.
If it's so silly, why are you doing a nervous laugh at it? Like, you clearly don't have an answer for this.
Because it's not a realistic.
Like it's a lot easier just laughing about it when everybody on the call is agreeing with you. It's like, oh, these silly people. But you can't solve it when I'm in the call with you, can you?
No, because it is easily solved. You just don't like my answer.
How do you solve
solution
it?
is, if it's me and my wife and it's about how to paint what color to paint the walls, then we just figure it out. We
Okay,
talk it out.
you
and
disagree on it,
eventually,
though. You don't agree. You don't come to an agreement. I agree. Yeah, it's fine. If everybody comes to an agreement, there's no conflict, but law doesn't study that. I'm asking about the situation where there's a conflict. Like, you're actually coming to blows over this now. Your wife is desperately trying to paint it red, and you're desperately trying to stop her. Who's in the right?
Well, okay, you're bringing in things that aren't part of legal theory. Like, if I go to the judge and say my wife painted the walls red, he's not going to rule on that because that's not a matter that the law has any say over.
Okay, you're confused about the nature of law here. The nature of law doesn't care about what the judge says. All right, judges are just trying to apply the law. Right, law is objective. It already exists whether the judges agree to it or not.
The law has nothing to say over me and my wife, who both own this house, over what color the wall gets painted. It would only have anything to say if you. It would only have anything to say if you broke into.
Property theory has to assign an owner here.
It's me and my wife. It is exclusive. It's me and my wife, and not you.
Okay, does the wall get painted or not?
If you break into my house, Zulu, and paint the walls orange, then I'm going to sue you in court.
Does the wall get painted or not?
If my wife paints the wall, then that's going to cause, and it was against my wishes, that's not going to cause an issue with the law. That's going to cause an issue in our relationship, and then we're going to have to work on our relationship and the lack of respect that we didn't come to an agreement and she did something anyway. Or if it was the other way around, it would be just as bad.
So then there was a conflict there, right? And the initiation of conflict is what aggression means. So she violated the non-aggression principle. Her action was criminal. Therefore, you own it and she doesn't.
No,
okay, so then she's allowed to paint it and you don't own it.
No, what you're doing is conflating different dimensions of human interactions.
I'm just talking about the legal realm. That's all I'm doing here.
Yeah, but the legal realm has nothing to say other than this: that my wife and I have decided that we own this property and that no one else can do anything to this property but us.
And how do you resolve conflicts between you and your wife?
The law, let me finish. The law does not say anything about how me and my wife decide to internally.
Still there? Did I lag out? Did you lag out?
I had a phone call come.
All right. You back with us now?
Yeah, someone's trying to call me. I'm telling them I can't talk right now.
All right.
Text me. No, what the law has nothing to say over how my wife and I decide to internally govern the ownership of our property. Unless now, if we had a contract, that would be different. And if I said you're in breach of a contract, then I could go to the judge and be like, she's in breach of this contract that we drew up about how we're going to internally regulate it. And even then, the law would only say, well, you're in breach of this contract. It would be very unusual for the law to say, well, because you breached this contract, you no longer own it. So listen, the argument, here's the problem with your arguments. You are conflating human dimensions, and you're also conflating complexity with not existing. Just because something is complex doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And just because some things aren't written down and exist in different realms of human dimensions and interactions that the law has nothing to say about, doesn't mean that then the property claim is null and void.
Okay, so real quick, does the wall get painted or not?
It doesn't matter if it gets painted or not.
Well, I can explain to you why it does matter. Because if it gets painted, if your property theory is saying that it should indeed be painted, that means you don't have the right to control that wall, which means you don't own it by definition, right? And vice versa for if it isn't painted. That's why it matters. Either option contradicts the presumption that both you and your wife own it. The law isn't just some fancy that you can dream up and say, well, we want to commonly own it. It doesn't fucking matter, right? It's a contradiction. You can't have contradictions. Contradictions aren't true.
Yeah, there's no contradiction there.
I just explained the contradiction.
You're trying to make up. It's not a contradiction.
Okay, does it get painted or not?
Contradiction. the fact that does not prove a contradiction.
Yes, it does.
Again, I've already, Zulu, you're repeating yourself now, and you haven't responded to what I said. I'll say it again, and if you don't have a response to it, then we're going to have to drop this. What you're doing is conflating complexity with not existing, and conflating that some things that happen in human relationships, that there's different dimensions to human society and human relationships that don't exist in the jurisdiction of the law. And you're conflating that with then a claim being null and void. If two people claim ownership to something, what the law has to say is that it's up to those two people, excuse me, it's up to those two people to determine together how they are going to use that property. And the law says no one else can. These two have the exclusive right. No one else can. The fact that me and my wife might disagree on how to use the property does not suddenly mean that we don't own the property. It just means that there's a complexity that the law sometimes has a say in, but very often doesn't have a say in. And that depends on different types of property. The law would have more to say about a joint business ownership, for example, than it would for if my wife paints the walls red when I didn't want her to. So again, you need, if you're going to respond, it can't just be to backtrack and say what you've already said. You need to explain why complexity in how these things get worked out between different, again, because the reason I have a hard time just answering your examples is because you're coming up with hypothetical examples, and each one's going to be different. Again, joint business ownership is different than two people owning a house or two people owning a car. And then two, you're going to have to explain how, the fact that some things don't get worked out in the law because of just the different dimensions of, like, again, my marriage is what governs who paints the wall, Zulu, okay? And that marriage is a completely different thing than the law has anything to say about. It is my marriage and my relationship that is a commitment between me and my wife to God, before God, that determines how we relate to each other and how we handle this dispute over how we're going to use our property, but it's still our property.
Right, so take whatever level of complexity you want. You could have the most complex algorithm in the world for deciding what happens here. That algorithm is going to spit out either that the wall gets painted or that it doesn't get painted, right? And both options contradict the presumption that both you and your wife own it. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist because it's complex. I'm saying no matter how complex the algorithm is that you come up with, you're still left with a contradiction. The complexity just is completely irrelevant to it, right? Because again, we're not studying those situations where you and your wife come to an agreement. I don't care about how complex it is to come to an agreement with your wife, all right? I'm talking about those situations where you don't come to an agreement.
The only thing you've proven is that when two people own something, that sometimes they can hit a really hard conflict in terms of how to use that property, and that sometimes we might not know the way that's going to get worked out. But what that doesn't prove is that anyone except those two people have an exclusive right to use it.
That wasn't my claim.
Zulu.
That wasn't my claim.
Even
you don't know my claim,
one person, Zulu. Even if one person owns a piece of property, they can be internally conflicted over how to use it. It doesn't mean that they don't have the exclusive right to use it.
Internal conflicts don't exist in the legal sense, right? I explain why. Basically, a conflict means
Zulu,
mutually exclusive actions. You can't have. Hold on. Let me just get my point out here.
An internal conflict between two people does not mean
in one person.
Legality has nothing to do with it.
An internal conflict with any single person isn't possible.
That is an arbitrary distinction.
I'm trying to explain my point here, all right? An internal conflict with any single person can't happen. Here's why. What conflict means is mutually exclusive actions. You can't have mutually exclusive actions with yourself. Whichever way you're acting, you are acting in that way. You can't act in way A and way non-A at the same time, because that's a contradiction. Whereas, two different people, they can act in mutually exclusive ways. Somebody can be trying to saw down a tree at the same time that somebody's trying to use the tree to swing on a branch. That is perfectly possible. You can have conflicts between people, but not within a given person. And that's why group property does not work. It can't happen. And I'm not making the claim that, therefore, everybody owns the public possessions. That is a complete inversion of my stance. I'm saying it's not the case that everybody owns it, because group property implies a contradiction. I'm saying either it's stolen from one specific guy out of eminent domain or whatever, in which case he clearly owns it, or it's unowned, in which case it's liable for homesteading. Those are the only two options remaining.
Those aren't the only two options remaining. Again, the
You think
ownership
negative
is
people can
about
own something?
exclusive. The ownership implies the exclusive right to use something, and you have not proven that just because conflicts arise, that suddenly those two people still aren't the ones that have the exclusive right to use a particular piece of property.
Okay, let's say
it doesn't follow. It just does not follow. Like what's carrying your argument, like what's doing all the heavy lifting for your argument, is this idea that, well, like you're almost trying to act like, well, the ownership of the property has to be conflict free, right? Mm-hmm. But what you're doing is begging the question in your own argument, Zulu, because you're basically saying that there can't be conflicts when internally when owning property. If there's two people who own property, then they can have a conflict, and then therefore two people can't own property. But you can have conflicts internally over something that you own. Like that you're begging
not with yourself.
Your conclusion is you're making the conclusion in the assumption of the premises of you're trying to build upon.
I want you to point to a concrete example of a person having a conflict with themselves.
No, but Zulu, even if you can't have a conflict with yourself, it doesn't follow that then two people having a conflict would mean that the property claim is null and void.
Right, I can explain why, right? Because either it's the case that person A in that conflict wins, or it's the case that they don't win. Those are our only two options. Law of the excluded middle.
Those are not
right.
Those are.
Do you deny the law of the excluded middle? There's a difference between. Do you think there's something else other than P and the negation of P?
Yeah, because in my marriage,
what is it?
My wife wants. In my example of my marriage, if my wife wants to paint the wall yellow, there's the option of she does paint the wall yellow. We have an argument, and then we resolve the tensions in our relationship, figure out the underlying reasons why she did it when we didn't agree to do it, and then we move on. There's no violation of property rights in that situation because we both had the exclusive right to use it. The violation was in the respect in our relationship.
Let's say your wife wanted to blow up the entire house whilst you were sleeping in it. All right, would you say there is no conflict there because we'd come to a resolution, we'd figure it out, we wouldn't be getting too angry about it? Yeah, I agree.
Destroying the that's completely different than a change of color.
Should the property be destroyed or not?
Yeah, I think different claims are going to come with different. Like if you're
should it be destroyed or not?
Over how to use it shouldn't be destroyed without both people agreeing to.
Okay, so then the wife doesn't have the right to control it. Because if I own a house completely to myself, then I'm allowed to demolish it all I want, right? Because I have the right to control it. Your wife isn't allowed to do that, so she doesn't own it. Which, wait a minute, that contradicts our presumption that she does own it.
No,
Whoops.
It doesn't contradict it. It means
so she both owns it and doesn't own it. Like, are you hearing yourself right now?
Zulu, what it means is that my wife and I both agreed to own a piece of property and both agreed to make decisions together. That's not a contradiction. It doesn't mean that, if we disagree, only one person owns it. No, it means two people own it and they have a disagreement. Again, you've just gone back in a circle again, and you're just trying to make this assertion that if there's a disagreement, then therefore there's a contradiction in the fundamental claim to ownership itself.
Yes, because there are two possible ways to resolve that disagreement. Either the thing happens or it doesn't, because of the law of the excluded middle, right? Are you denying the law of the excluded middle just before we proceed?
Define the law of the excluded middle.
It means that there's either P or not P. For any given proposition P, it's either the case that P or not P. There isn't some third option. So let's say let's take a
arbitrary.
concrete.
What do you?
Oh my
what
God,
do
it's
you-
not arbitrary. Let's take a concrete example. If I say the sky is blue, now it's either going to say that is my proposition. The sky is blue. It's either the case that the sky is blue or the sky isn't blue. Those are our two options. Unless you think this is not true that.
Not every proposition is a binary like that.
Ah, what are you talking about? This is logic 101. What's the alternative between true and false?
Again, you're talking about statements.
What's the alternative between true and false? You said you are denying the law of the excluded middle now. What is the alternative? A proposition is either true or false. What's the third option?
No, what I said is not every proposition. If you're talking about true false propositions, those are by definition binary. But not every proposition in the world is a true false proposition.
Okay, so what is the alternative between either the wall gets painted yellow or it doesn't get painted yellow? What's the third option there?
No. In that situation you're constructing, there's
okay.
One
so should the wall get painted yellow or not?
Okay, this is where it's no longer that has to be that. The answer is the two people who own it need to figure that out.
They can't figure it out, no matter how hard they try. They just can't figure it out. They are in complete disagreement, and now they're coming to blows over it. One person is trying to paint it yellow. They're trying to paint it yellow, and the other person is trying to swat it out of their hand. Right? Who is correct here?
What will happen is there will be tensions in that household. But if you go, what the law would say there is, well, there's nothing inherently here that's going to say that, well, because she painted the wall yellow, that therefore you can deny her right to own the house. You guys entered a voluntary agreement to own this house together.
I'm saying we have two options here that our legal theory can possibly come to. Our legal theory could either say that the wall should be painted yellow, or it can say that it shouldn't be painted yellow. Those are our only two options. If our legal theory says that the wall should be painted yellow, that means the wife has the right to control the wall. If not, then she doesn't have the right to control it.
Unless there was a contract about that included, something in there about how we decide how to paint the walls. If we own a house together and we're having a disagreement over what color to paint the walls, the law doesn't have anything to say about it.
Yes, it does, because there's a conflict.
No, it doesn't. Not every conflict that happens within a joint ownership of a piece of property is a matter that elevates to the jurisdiction of the law.
Okay, I wanted to ask you this. What do you think the law studies?
The law studies contradictions over the disputes over property.
Right, and there's a dispute over property here. One person wants to paint the wall yellow. One person doesn't want this to happen. What should happen?
But they're both owners, and so what should happen
indeed. So what should happen?
That's for the owners to decide.
Okay, one owner says they want to paint it yellow. The other owner says they don't want to paint it yellow. Where do we go from here?
Keep going in circles. Again, this is the last time I'm going to answer this. They will figure it. There's a few different outcomes that could happen. They either figure it out. If they can't figure it out, then we have to, and if it's in like the situation of like a marriage, well, then that's still not a situation where the law would say, oh, well, she doesn't own, she has violated property rights because it is her property. If she did something to destroy the house, like demolish it, like the house is gone, or she sold it, and I wasn't involved in the transaction. First of all, that probably would be hard to do because if you're both on the title, it'd be hard to. You'd probably need both signatures. But whatever. Like there are situations where she could act in a way where the law would have jurisdiction over that. But not every dispute is of the nature that's going to rise to that level. It would have to be something that involves the actual loss of or the destruction of the property. And that's just because, well, if you lose the property or you destroy it, well, then, you can't own it anymore because it's gone. So that would be why it rises to the level of an actual violation, again, sans the existence of a contract.
Okay, let's just take the reduction case. Let's say there are only two people on Earth, Crusoe and Friday, right?
By the way, I just for the sake of time and that there's other people that have requested to come up, I'll let you have ask one last question and I'll give an answer, but then I'm going to have to, move on to some other people here.
Sure. So there are only two people, Crusoe and Friday, and they decide, you know what, let's just co-own everything. Everything on the entire planet, everything in the universe. We'll both own it. Now, how in that situation could they ever resolve any conflict over anything? How could they avoid conflicts over anything? How could they do anything with respect to conflicts? How could they do it?
It's a reductive. You can't even answer that because it's impossible to own everything. You can't homestead everything.
Okay, just everything anybody touches. Anytime anybody homesteads anything, they're like, right, we'll both own that from here on out.
Again, the premise makes absolutely no sense. Did they homestead it all, or did other people homestead it?
There's only two people, just Crusoe and Friday. Whenever either of them homesteads a single thing, they will both own it. Everything on the island, they both own, right? Hardly resolve conflicts.
That's for them to decide. I mean,
I think that basically sums it up. They'll just decide, We have no legal theory anymore. They can just figure it out.
Well, if there's only two people in the whole world, there is no, practical legal theory. I mean, it's going to be at that.
Because there's two people, they can have conflicts. That's what legal theory studies.
Yeah, but if two people are going around homesteading things and they both say that they own it, and then again, you keep on coming up with these different hypotheticals, and then they always end on the same answer. And listen, I think your problem is you want things to fit neatly on a bumper sticker. Like, here's one principle, and it applies universally in all cases. But different this is going to blow your mind. Different types of relationships and different types of ownerships are going to be different.
Hey, look, man, I'm just living in reality, and in reality, conflicts can happen. You're just ignoring reality. You're living in marriage in your head.
You just spent 45 minutes trying to,
I'm in reality, bro. You're not in reality here. You're ignoring reality. You're just living in marriage in your head. They'll just work it out. They'll just somehow figure it out.
Idea.
Is this your legal theory? This is nonsense. And you were supposed to be the one steel manning me. This is hilarious. Ignoring reality. You're just living in marriage in your head. They'll just work it out. They'll just somehow figure it out. Is this your legal theory? This is nonsense. And you were supposed to be the one.
The idea that two people can't own a house together, like a married couple can't own a house together, or that two people can't go into business together and have a contract for how to. It's just silly. That's not serious.
It's just silly, guys.
ANCAP, voluntarist, libertarian philosophy. So anyway, we're going to move on.
And this is the guy to steal me.
Just waving his hand like a madman. So I will let him up.
Man, that was exhausting.
All right.
I do want to say.
Hold on. I'm going to make you a co-host, and we're going to collectively own this.
Well, I honestly, that's really funny. I have very little time to say anything at this point, but I do want to say, as wrong as I think Zulu is about this, I do think you're kind of missing part of his point.
Yeah,
possibly.
No way.
So I do want to kind of just try to sum up what I think he's trying to say, which is that, even if you're in a marriage, right? Like, if there's some issue, and I think that the issue of painting the wall is a hard one to use because it's so trivial to think that like people would come to blows over that. But let's say it's something more major, like
it just won't happen. Like, this is the legal theory that these guys have.
One person wants to, put a huge addition on the house or something that's a little bit bigger. There is a third option here. It's not a binary situation where the addition gets put on or it doesn't get put on necessarily. The final outcome could be that you just dissolve the marriage entirely because the two people can't, in this instance, make a decision or come to
These
an
people have
agreement
not heard of
together.
this, by the way.
So the
They have no
contracts,
clue.
the marriage contract has to be dissolved. The people split up, and the house gets sold, and each person gets their 50% of whatever the sale of the house is, and a new owner comes along, either another married couple or a single person, who can better operate that property. So it's sort of like, it goes back to sort of his cloud example, or not his cloud example. Sorry, that's my example. The true or false thing, where it's like something's either true or false. Okay, so if I say, is the sky blue, true or false, right? Or if I say, is the sky blue or gray, and so you say it's blue. Well, no,
it's true that the sky
it's not
is
just blue or gray. It could be blue and gray at the same time.
Right.
And so there are third options here. It's not a complete binary.
The proposition there is the sky is blue or gray. That proposition is either true or false. These people have not done Logic 101.
Yeah, in a marriage, when you own something 50-50, the one person can't just do something unless the other person consents. Now, someone could go ahead and just do something like paint the wall.
Are you a logician or not?
And the other person could consent by saying, you know what, I wish you didn't paint the wall without asking me, but it's really not a big enough deal for me to continue this conflict over the wall gets painted. And in this situation, I consented to it retroactively. But if for some reason I don't want to consent to it retroactively, then even if the wall ends up getting painted, the real final result is that neither one of us own the house anymore. We each get our half of the house in terms of the value of selling the house, and ultimately, hopefully, the marriage is dissolved because in that situation, the two people couldn't own something together properly, and some people can and some people don't, and that's why a lot of marriages end in divorce, because it is very difficult to have a 50-50 type ownership situation, whether it's an ownership of a house or having kids, and you sort of each have an equal say in how the kids are raised, whatever it is. It's extremely difficult. It doesn't, just because it's extremely difficult doesn't mean it's not something that can exist in reality. So I do think there's a point that Zulu was making there when he kept saying, well, does the wall get painted or does the wall not get painted? Well, those aren't necessarily the two final outcomes of this conflict. The other possible final outcome of this conflict is that the contract gets dissolved and both people end up with their 50% of the house. It doesn't really fucking matter if the wall gets painted or not. The real final result here is that the house gets sold to somebody else and each person takes their 50%, which proves that each person owned the house equally because they each get 50% of whatever the sale was.
Yeah, and a lot of this just comes down to, like, you need the specifics of how the joint ownership was decided upon, right? Like, and it gets tricky if there's no contract. And a lot of people, when they buy a house, like, both of their names might be on the title, but it doesn't mean they have like a 50-page contract attached, to their relationship in terms of like how they're going to resolve every little dispute in terms of like, like, well, what are we going to do if we want to paint the walls? What are we going to do if I want to put hedges in or something like that? Like, a lot of that is kind of, left up for the two people. Like, well, you both own it, so you're going to have to, be adults and talk to each other and work those things out. Now,
right. And Jacob, what happens if they can't come to an agreement, right? What happens? The ultimate.
There's a lot of things that could happen, right? Like, you could go to marriage counseling. You could go and ask like a third person to come in and kind of like help.
Right, but one of the possible outcomes, Jacob, is not that one person ends up owning 51% of the house and the other person 49 because the wall got painted. The possible outcomes are you either consent retroactively or you dissolve the marriage and you split up and you break up and you sell the house. Those are the two outcomes.
And then, I don't know.
Zulu, honestly, I think Zulu's kind of like, yeah, I mean, he seems pretty smart. I'm not interested in necessarily insulting the guy, but I mean, he's down there laughing and like, he just comes off more like a troll, to be honest with you. And like, I don't think he's being entirely serious, to be honest with you. Like, I don't feel like he's having this argument with you, a discussion with you in good faith necessarily. I don't get that impression. I think he's trying to be difficult on purpose. I could be wrong, and if I am, that's fine. I do think that there was a point he was making there that was being missed, so I do give him credit for that. But like, I don't know, man. That was exhausting. It was really exhausting to listen to.
I know, that's why I said at some point I was like, yeah, listen, I can go full, autist theory all day in debates, and I was like, what, like, just hard stop, like, we're going to have to move on and
you didn't
talk
last
to some other people. But I agree with you. Like, yeah, that is the other way that would end is that's like, hey, we're not going to own this anymore, and then you figure out how you're going to deal with the proceeds of the sale.
They didn't own it in the first place.
What you never end up with in any of these outcomes is, there was no that the joint claim to ownership was invalid, right? Like, just because it's a more complicated scenario for two people to own something rather than one doesn't mean that they can't. It just means that it's harder, and you would have to just be more careful. When you decide to go into joint ownership with somebody over anything.
Half the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think it's not like
not let you or anything.
I feel like in his world, and honestly, I can hop back down and if you want to bring him back up, you can. But I feel like in his world, it's like if the wall ends up getting painted, then it proves that the person who wanted it painted is the one who owns the house. When in actuality, the real situation is if the house gets sold, it doesn't matter that person got their way because they don't have the house anymore. So what does it really matter if the wall got painted? It's the person who buys the house who, is the one who benefits or not from the wall having been painted ultimately. So that's what I wanted to say. I appreciate you bringing me up, man. Like it is, at the end of the day, like it is fun to have these discussions because they're interesting and they're pretty high level and it's good stuff. But like the average person listening to that conversation is just going to be like where's my local Democratic official?
The average person in this debate doesn't understand.
Just going to run away and be like, this is nuts. Like this is crazy talk.
I'm the only one
and that matters because we're trying to get more people to think about freedom and liberty, and the average person, man, they're not like, there's like my wife this or my family that, I got my own problems, I got my bills to pay. Like they don't care about these discussions, and they're interesting, but like to very, very, very few of us.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of to back up to the main topic of the room. I think that was kind of half the point Dave and I were making in the stream last night, which is that, like, listen, we want to reach people with the ideas of voluntarism, of anarcho-capitalism, of private property rights. I'm actually going through a tunnel, so hopefully you guys can still hear me. But the way to do that is often not just through okay, let's lead on the nose and just start like, oh, you're having a problem with this tragedy of the common situation, and so what we need to do is privatize everything. And even though yes, that is kind of the solution, that's not going to help that person right then and there. And I think before we preach at people our principles, we need to talk to them, reach them in their humanity, empathize with what they're going through.
Empathize,
and
just love.
It's not wrong to speak to short-term, triage, right? Like the short-term fixes that help people in the immediate short term deal with the consequences of statism, deal with the consequences of central planning and public property. While also then, as we build relationships with people and as we, show people that, listen, it's statism is bad. Not all statism and not all central planning is created equally, right? I think there's just a spectrum of better and worse.
Central planning is fine. It works.
It's just hard for me to be and I feel like you just have to admit that, minarchy, like a minarchist watchman state, even though I'd still that's not my ideal solution, or even let's go back to just the founding of America. Let's go back to just the Constitution, right? That's
very much
so much better than where we're at now.
Carlson.
Doesn't mean that there's zero distortions caused by the introduction of the state, but those distortions are going to be far less. It's a spectrum, I think, and so in that same way, we can advocate for solutions to problems that are going to like appeal to people because they work, because they are further down the spectrum of being towards
synthesis,
libertarian answers and moving away from the extreme versions of central planning and monopolization and things like that. And then once people see, oh wow, when we moved in this direction, things got better, that then gets them curious to be like, well, they could have conversation with them, be like, hey, like we got better just moving that much more towards freedom. Now, let me tell you about what would happen if we went the whole way. Like, I think that's how you reach people, and I think Dave does a good job at that. And so that's why we're willing to. I don't think it's playing statist games like where that makes us statists. Like we are playing in the arena of the state, in the arena of politics, but to try to be people who are a force for good, and then in our interactions with people, we're able to tell them about our ideas. Let me go ahead and bring up Jack. Jack, you there?
Hello.
Hey.
Hey.
So yeah, go ahead and give me your thoughts. Especially, I'd be curious to hear you respond to the last thing I said, because I know you and I kind of were arguing a little bit about that earlier today. So I kind of expounded on my thoughts there. So yeah, what do you think? Do you disagree with what I'm saying in terms of the approach of how engaging in politics and in not necessarily always leading with we need to go like if you use the homeschool example, not everyone's going to be able to pull their kids out of school. I always lead with that. That's always if I'm talking to someone in my church or my community and they're complaining about the schools, I'm like, get them the hell out of the public schools. Okay, but then they're going to respond and give me a bunch of reasons why they can. And I can try to, I could sit there and argue with them, be like, oh, well, if you did this, and this, you'd be able to. Everyone's situation is different. Some people are single parents. Some people are both parents are trying to work. Because let's face it, the economy is crap, right? Inflation's a thing. It's hard for people to have one person working, one person staying home with the kids. So it doesn't mean I give up. Like, it doesn't mean that I go, okay, don't ever bring up homeschooling again. But then it's like, all right, what if we're also able, while we're advocating for homeschooling and taking people out of public schools, can we be on the school boards? Can we be going to these places of public property? And can we make judgments of, hey, there are better and worse ways of this public property and these schools being managed that are going to be causing more or less harm? And if we advocate for things that are further down the spectrum towards our end, and those lead to improvements, that to me, that's a win-win, because A, that improves people's lives, and B, that opens up even more conversations for, hey, moving the needle this much towards freedom created this much human flourishing. Why don't we keep pursuing that? What are your thoughts?
Sure. So I just wanted to address just a couple of things because, before there was this discussion with Zulu, and there was this issue when it comes to, talking about, what he was saying, a little bit of confusion. I just want to quickly encapsulate what was going on there, because it's just really fundamentally underpins everything, right? When it comes to property rights, right, we have to define what those things are. What does it mean to have property? And if you're a property owner, you have the ability to use something a certain way, deny others it, destroy it if you want. Like if you have a chocolate bar, you can crush it in your hands if you wish, whatever it is. So when we're defining property rights, we're thinking through these issues through the core philosophy, right? We have to recognize that the conflicts over scarce resources get amplified the more that we have these false labels of everybody's a shared owner in something. Because performatively, it's a contradiction, just like we talked about with the husband-wife situation. If a husband can paint a wall, but the wife also can paint the wall because they both own it, well, they're going to deny each other the use, right? Because he's going to try to paint it one color, she'll paint over him, and now functionally they're being denied each other's use. And so that concept is why this collective ownership thing doesn't work for anything, whether it is a public bench, whether it is joint property, like a joint house ownership thing, or whether it is the public school situations. Because what happens is you have a bunch of people who are now fighting each other through school boards and PTA meetings and all that sort of stuff. And they're saying, oh, well, the curriculum should be this, or the kids need to have these field trips, or, oh, we got to, have them use this language, or they have to learn script or this or that. And it's a never ending fight of people against each other. And the government always wins on that fight, because as long as people are fighting each other over these farcical terms, these ideas that, oh, the public owns things, then everyone's busy combating for that seat of authority instead of being able to, in a free private market, choose what it is that they want best. And even for parents where it might be tough for them, they say, it's expensive, I already have taxes, getting kids to school, it's kind of a big stress thing. The good news is that we as libertarians don't have, nothing to show for this kind of stuff. It's actually pretty incredible what libertarians have to show, because as libertarians, as voluntarists, as ANCAPs, we understand that the compulsory schooling paradigm is not even the ethical system. It's not itself a private market order system. It's something that was actually designed by the government to break down the individual creativity and will of young people as they succumb to obeying teachers for the sake of grades, right? The central planned mindset, which is actually, public school, is the biggest structure of central planning forced on people in the world. In no other place except maybe like North Korea do you have something where the government centrally plans hour by hour what children will do for 13 straight years. And if we're really adamant about getting people out of this socialist, centrally planned mindset, that is the root. That is where young people's ambitions and drives are quelled as they're told whatever the government wants to believe. And they're so traumatized into following authority that when they graduate, they can't imagine how roads could be built if not for the government. They can't imagine what it's like to have free choice and free trade, because they've been so accustomed to a prison state, a police state, where they have no privacy, where they're searched all the time, where they have their stuff taken away, where they're told, if you read something outside the curriculum, you're going to be a failure. You're going to work at McDonald's. And this is actually such a precious and important part of the libertarian focus that I cannot stress enough, that it's our job, as in we are the best messengers, to tell people that there are alternatives and they are not as expensive or as crazy as people might think. Because a lot of the time they're thinking, oh, I have to replicate what is in compulsory school. They try to make it like that and then they get overwhelmed. And in truth, young people actually are naturally curious and self-directed learners. And if adults change their attitude toward it and they actually treat it as a facilitation of learning and not you have to learn this by a certain time, otherwise I'm going to feel stressed and I'm going to shame you, it gets rid of a lot of that pressure. And there are many wonderful 501c3 groups and what are called umbrella schools, where someone could be in a private school and essentially they can, unschool, like have freedom in learning, or there's Sudbury schools where there's, co-ops of students who are working together, and they're on sliding scale tuition. People don't know this, but even if you're poor, with sliding scale tuition, you can go there and get a scholarship to go for free. And it's just something that is not commonly known, because you don't expect the public schools to tell you about this, right? They don't want to tell you about the competition. You're not going to hear that posted on the newsletter at your school, at your public school, that, oh, hey, by the way, there's better solutions out there. There's ways to leave this place. And oh, by the way, you can even do it for low cost or no cost. So we have this chance to radically shift the culture, because right now, more than ever, children have never been more abused, more controlled, especially after lockdowns and shutdowns. And so many families saw what was going on in schools. They saw the curriculum virtually. They realized that it was horrific. They saw the SJW brainwashing. They saw the statism and the collectivism. They saw how tedious and mindless some of these tasks the kids are doing. And when people got that insight, we had record numbers of people leaving. And not only that, it stayed sustainable. And Carrie McDonald did a great job of covering that. She's a Foundation for Economic Education scholar. She has her master's degree from Harvard. She actually unschooled her 4 kids, and she's a great reporter on all this stuff. And so I highly recommend you check out Carrie McDonald's work if you are a parent and you're concerned about, what you could do. There are so many wonderful solutions, and it's just a matter of taking the time to look at it, get apprised of it, and see that there is a way to make it work. And even for people on the edge, and of course, there's always going to be some people that's too tough, but But if you're on the edge, there is a way, and we can get most of these kids out of schools if we just make that the focus of our direction, instead of wondering what, different color they're going to paint the school or what curriculum they're going to teach next year. We don't have to waste our time with that. We can educate the next generation and inspire parents to get their kids out, and that will do more for liberty a generation from now than any other possible thing, because you will not have a generation raised with a whole 13-year program of status brainwashing. I mean, that's incredible on its own. Just the blessings of young people not having that shame complex of state control is going to be radical for liberty. And so that's near and dear to my heart. And that's what I just want people to take away from that, because I think that's missed in the process.
Yeah, I mean, no, certainly. I mean, there's not a whole lot there I would disagree with. I mean, first of all, it's all good information. People should definitely know about. There's so many different options when it comes to homeschooling, and
these norms, they really just do care about presentation,
and also you're 100% right on in terms of the expectations, because some people think they have to copy the public school system, which they shouldn't. I will say, now this is an area where I think that political activism and getting on school boards, maybe even sometimes getting to the state level to lobby for homeschooling rights is important, because it varies by state, and then even in different states it varies by school district and jurisdiction. They set different guidelines, right? And so sometimes the guidelines are so restrictive that they almost are trying to force parents to copy their model, and then they keep raising the bar and stuff. Like, I live in Pennsylvania. Every year we have to do an evaluation at the end of the year. Now, that is going to vary by school district.
Same shit with like fucking
more
Dave
so than by the state. So, like, if your superintendent just doesn't really care,
like, oh, this
right?
Ace
Then you can
guy,
find an
Ace
evaluator
he
who's
makes
certified.
sense, right? He's
they
saying
can do that
Zulu,
evaluation,
he's
and
insane.
they're
Then we're
typically
making
pretty
the exact
reasonable.
same
But
argument.
I've heard of other people in different
Insane.
places where
It's nonsense.
they've had to
They
redo
don't know
things
how
2 or
to
3 times.
actually think in
even
terms of
had,
logic.
Been threatened, like, oh well, we need to see this much progress in these areas by next year in your kid, or we're gonna not approve them being homeschooled again. So there's definitely so I agree with you that on the in principle, we don't have to copy what the public schools do, and it's not as hard as what people can sometimes imagine it is. But there are some, depending on where you live, your mileage will vary. There's going to be state introduced conflicts to that outside of just the economic barriers and things like that. So, but other than that, I largely agree with you on the schooling part. But I often think, not only can we walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, but also just division of labor. Like, not everyone's going to have the same enthusiasm
division of labor,
or even maybe like skill set and experience with understanding the school system, understanding homeschooling, unschooling, and things like that like you and I have. So, for you or me, we're probably better suited focusing on that. Other people, although they should, probably still mention homeschooling and point people in our direction, that, they might be better suited to be, serving on their city council or school board and things like that, and be doing what they can to both roll back the system, dismantle it from the inside and all that, and then also do damage control too. So I guess I just don't see that there's a conflict between these two goals. Like, I think we can advocate for.
Rand wasn't poor, right? She was
selecting out of the system as much as we can.
Abandoned principle. She was wrong.
While also trying to do something about the people who just won't, or either can't,
hated charity,
or won't be convinced.
That's a big.
Well, when it comes to the question of doing something and alternatives and different specializations, the question I always like to point to people is, what is in your specific control, right? On the individual level, each person has their unique talents, interests, money, resources, and voice. And not everyone, as you said exactly, is going to be suited toward everything. But if you're going to be in the position where you say, okay, I want to try to change things from the inside, run for an office or something like that, I would say someone who is principled and consistently looks for ways to cut state interference and to cut anything that involves the theft or the abuse, that is the first rung priority of someone who's in there. Is not to say, well, I want to play different games about what's the best field trips we're going to do this year, but to rather say, hey, okay, rule number one we want to go after is any restriction on homeschoolers and people being able to opt out, that kind of thing. Looking for opportunities to break up the status controls and the paradigms with compulsory attendance laws. Looking for any way to get rid of things that are explicit acts of violence or controls over kids, right? So there's people who have different incrementalisms. You know, I'd say on the loosest form, some people talk about school choice. That's not necessarily my favorite thing, but it's, you know, I understand why people might say that to try to break up the school monopolies. That is the teachers' unions and, you know, basically the government having the major controls. But regardless of whatever way you want to tackle it, if you're not actually moving in the direction of we're reducing the size, scope, power of the state, we're getting the government out of lives and wallets functionally, not just shifting it around to, okay, we're going to do something different, then we're not actually moving toward a libertarian order. We just are moving things around and playing different policy fantasies about what's best. And so it's difficult for people to sometimes stay focused on that because they get caught up in the fear of, oh, well, what if there's this bad thing that happens, or what if whatever, there's a crackhead or whatever it is. But in reality, school is itself not just something that is benign and, you know, needs to be a little bit better. They could get some better test scores if they just only got more money or whatever. It is literally the most pernicious form of manipulation by the state. It is one of the greatest mass systems of abuse and violence against children. And it is something that is so horrific that it really is a matter of getting your kids out of there, like as a first rung priority. And if you're a parent, that is in your control to a degree, as best as you can, to get your kids out of school. You don't typically in many states have to do much in terms of permissions to get your kids out. You can make that choice. You don't have to go lobby. You don't have to go pass a bill. You don't have to go buy a politician. You can say, I'm going to take my kids out. I'm going to do something else. And that is way more tangible for the overwhelming majority of people than to say, you know, I'm going to go and raise $10 million. We're going to try to do a campaign. Hopefully I win for the school board next year, right? So that's why I'm saying it's a multi-tiered thing. But if we don't have principled people in there, then they're not going to actually be cutting the size, scope, and power of the state, because it'll just be a matter of playing to different fears of people. And then they'll just say, well, we just need better schools. Well, you can't make better what is itself an unethical construct. And if you do try to paper it over in the same way the Federal Reserve prints money and makes people think, oh, well, we'll be okay, you know, we'll just kick the can down the road, then you delude people about the nature of state central planning. And you get them to think that, oh, well, we can do this right this time. The government can do it right. And it's no, it can't. It's inherently violent. It's inherently going to take out of market opportunities with everything that they do, because it comes at the expense of private alternatives. It comes at the expense of freedom to choose.
By the way, this is what the
there is
thumbnail
no,
is about.
you know, winning in that arena unless you're actually reducing, cutting down towards zero the violence of the state. And with every cut that is now back in the hands of individuals, the chance to do something in the market that is better, that attracts people and says, oh, you know, that's a lot better. We should be going in that direction. This is much better than the state solution. And that's what we want. We want to inspire people with the better alternatives, and we do have it. So it's just a matter of keeping that thinking outside the state.
I suppose the nuance I see here is, because I would agree with you on the whole, but you mentioned fear, right? And I think that's kind of the crux of the issue, that fear is a very powerful instrument. It's probably the most powerful instrument that the state wields. And as libertarians, as much as it is our job to preach truth, it's also, to some extent, the battle we're facing is we're fighting against fears. We're fighting against fears that people have been programmed with from birth, as you've kind of pointed out, that, you know, this is the schools are a major component of this, and the indoctrination and the installation of like a fear of authority and sort of a blind submission, blind obedience, and so that's a problem. But then it's okay. Well, we have to acknowledge that a lot of people are conditioned that way, and so when we're coming to them and talking to them about our ideas and we're trying to advocate for different solutions, it's not always going to be enough to just like we can paper down the truth as eloquently as we can about how bad the public school system is and about how great the homeschooling alternatives are. but some people are just going to be frozen of the fear because it's new, it's unknown to them, and they've been, there's a unfortunate comfortability to the authoritarianism that they've been raised in. This concept is something that the Matrix movie does such a brilliant job keying in on, because there's that I always forget the guy's name, but the one who's like making the deal with the AI, like, I want to get back, I'm going to plug back in, like, I don't like this reality, it's too uncomfortable, it's too much hard work. And that's true. A lot of people, when you try to come at them with the truth, they're going to push back because of that fear, and that's not always going to be easy to overcome. And I think that's why sometimes some people, now listen, I'm much more a abolish and privatize guy than a reform guy. So, like, yeah, when you say these things can't be fixed, I agree they can't be fixed, right? Like, there's no way to take anything public and make it perfectly replicate what it would do if it was private, right? But that doesn't mean, kind of like I said earlier, like, listen, the Constitution, okay, we went back to, like, a government that looked like, it did in 80, whatever, when the Constitution was ratified. Is that still statist, and is that still society would look like? Yes. However, the level of distortions and the level of damage being caused is so significantly less that that's maybe a little bit of a reductio, because I'm like comparing us to the Constitution, at the time of America's founding. But my point is being that, like, although I agree that all state institutions are fundamentally, principally founded on violence and coercion, I just don't think that means that then, like, how that plays out is like it's just similar across the board, and that there's not a spectrum of much better and much worse. And I think that there is, to some extent, some utility to people who have that reform desire. Not that I want this, I don't want to ever, again, this is where I think we have to do two things at once. It's like what I don't like about a lot of the reformers that used to be running the LP is that they're reformers, but their reforming efforts were to the end of the state is good, and that's no, state is not good. But if you're reforming while simultaneously saying, listen, because we're using words here, and they're kind of vague, right? What does reform mean?
Hear me.
Well, the reforms that I'm talking about, and the reforms that you would be talking about, are mostly going to be like finding ways to reduce the amount of violence and coercion that these state institutions are implementing, or to increase the amount of freedom and privatization at play in whatever given field we're talking about, like, in schooling, for example. And even if it's not perfect, any improvements we make,
you should be able to hear me. I can see.
I think those can be like, glitches in the matrix, so to speak. And then we can, use that to cut through the fear that people have. So I think Jack, let me put this to you, and I want to get your response.
There seems to be talking more about schools.
Steel man, your position is that you're afraid that when we focus on reform rather than privatize, that it's going to create an air of legitimacy to the state, because people will come away with the impression of, oh, look, we can fix the state and the state works. I would agree with you that we don't want that outcome. What I'm suggesting is that when we're going down these reforms, what we have to be loud on, and so the principled people who are doing these things need to be very clear. We are not reforming the state and making the state good.
So
the reason why these policy changes are producing greater results is because of the extent to which we have removed government violence and removed government coercion, or forced, like a particular public institution to do things that the private institutions would do. So the message needs to be there in conjunction. But I think we can do that. We can, advocate for, hey, pull your kids out of this thing. Here are all these great alternatives. And then also, in the meantime, let's be rolling that thing back listen, like, I understand you don't want to be wasting time moving chairs on the Titanic, but if we can do things that get people to wake up and that, make those small improvements, as long as we're trying to funnel it all in the same direction, I don't think these different strategies have to be opposed, or that we have to be, enemies of each other or calling each other out. We're all trying to pursue the same goal, just, trying different means and different strategies based upon, a lot of different factors, right? Personality type, gifting, where you're at, etc. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the main thing is when we're talking about this word reform, I'm not speaking to reform, and I think you went in this direction as well. So I would say you almost are starting to stick out from other people in the circle making this argument that reform is not about making government more efficient or better, like, oh, it's a more friendly tax victim IRS portal this tax season, right? We're talking about cutting the actual violence of the state. We're talking about cutting theft of taxes. We're talking about abolishing agencies. We're talking about cutting restrictions in the market. So that is the only thing that I am focused on when it comes to my advocacy. And I say that is what is necessary to maintain across the board in every advocacy, that the goal is always about abolishing aspects of government, repealing laws, getting the government to stop stealing. Again, even if it's not all the way, every theft that is stopped is now back in the market. It's now back in the beneficial voluntary market, right? When the government is not regulating a business and they say, okay, we're going to step out, now you're back to productivity. And so the more that we move that capitalist dial toward productivity, the more the market flourishes and the more people are attracted to it, and the more they're aware of the bounties of the market. People only become aware of how bad the state is when the pain is so strong that the pain to stay the same is just too much. Like, okay, this is too much, I need to change. And we've seen that time and again. The lockdowns and the shutdowns, the mask mandates, the vaccines and all that stuff. When people actually saw what the government was capable of doing and how quickly they could destroy lives and cast away entire groups of people as useless, non-essential workers, it took that level of oppression for people to go, whoa, what is going on? What is this government? Oh my gosh, something needs to change. And you don't get to that pain like in Argentina until you have that very much realized pain of central planning. If you hide the central planning, then people think government's great. See, they're just providing nice parks, they're providing nice schools. But when the government is making so many different plunders and hiding how much they're stealing because of our technological wealth. America is so rich beyond imagination. People have no idea how rich we really are because the government steals so much from us that we think that we're just creeping along, a little bit of, oh, here's a new iPhone. We would be having flying cars already if it wasn't for the government's intervention. People have no idea how much we've been robbed. And the only reason that they're even comfortable with the government theft as it's been is because we have had so much abundance. And so sadly, so often people don't change until it's too late or it's close to too late, like with Javier Milei and what happened in Argentina. So my goal is to get people to be principled and consistent and to say the government is not the solution to the problems. If we're going to be in political office, every goal is always going to be, what can I cut? How can I get rid of government theft? How can I get government out of regulating the market? Every time. No exceptions, no excuses ever, not once. Javier Milei did that wonderfully. He just always criticized the state, not an inch to socialists. He said, listen, if you want to have production, if you want to have the benefits of the market, you need to get these parasites out. All they do is hamstring you and destroy you and steal, and they're evil and vile. He called out the evil of state central planning. And if you don't have that level of fervency, you miss out that the halfwayisms and the pandering that ends up losing that momentum. It ends up losing the consistency that's required to actually not have the state grow. Because if there's any exception, that is always the rule. The exception is what gets through, no matter what you do. Just like a single issue voter who's really big into abortion issues, if they voted for a neocon, well, guess what? Maybe they're good in abortion, but they go blow up people overseas in the Middle East, and now kids are dead there. So again, if you have exceptions and you're just, well, I'm going to single issue vote now because it's the borders or whatever next PSYOP problem they want to create division over, You're going to lose every time because the government's going to grow, the police state's going to grow. So you have to have that consistent principle of mindset, and it always needs to be about how do we get government out of our lives and wallets? How do we have a peaceful market order and voluntary trade? Because we understand that those bring all sorts of blessings to everybody, wealth beyond imagination, peace and prosperity, beyond anything you can imagine in a book, that's written about some fictional future. It really is that incredible. We're always, going to be amazed by it, just like it'd be difficult for George Washington to imagine what an iPhone is like, right? So we need to stay focused on the goals, stay focused on that, not give socialists an inch, not give rationalizations for state control an inch, and everything we do, if we keep that up, we will lead. We will be the leaders who cause other people to change and pander to us like Vivek pandered to Javier Milei. And that is what we want. We want to lead on principles. And we don't have to get lost in, what will we do about all these different things with the school and this, that. Forget about it. Focus on the principles of getting people to think outside the state, and you will have that revolution like Javier Milei brought to Argentina.
Yeah, I think so. So here's where I guess we might have a little bit of a fundamental disagreement, because
let's get fucking Ace.
Listen, if we were living in Argentina like conditions, well then yeah, like when things get to that level,
probably do it as well.
Then I mean at that point, like you're just chucking Hail Marys all day long because there's nothing else to do. And that's not to say there's not problem, like that we don't have a lot of major crises here in America right now, but we are not at that point yet where things are so bad. I think that's kind of your point. Like things are not that bad, and if we try to provide cover for them or try to make them better, it's going to provide cover for it, and people won't see the real problems. So while I kind of get your point, what I don't think follows from that, and I don't want to straw man you, Jack, so like interrupt if I'm getting this wrong, but what I don't think follows then is that we need to either accept all the bad things that the state are doing and then provide no pushback in certain areas because we were afraid that it's going to provide cover and make it look like the state will work, or God forbid be, and I don't think this is what you're saying, but I can imagine like this is sort of like the collapsitarian accelerationist approach, which is just like, well, no, we need to make it worse so that people see how bad the state is and then, are ready to listen to us. So I find that to be my issue with both those mentalities is that it's kind of hard to go up to people and say, like, I need you to buy into my, listen to me and talk about my ideas and this philosophy that I think is beautiful, that promotes human flourishing. And that's going to, in the meantime, put me on the side of advocating for not doing anything to, about these specific ways in which the state is causing you harm because I don't want to, provide cover for the state. Like, I think that's sort of where my concern is with the way you're looking at things. So what is your thought on that? Am I getting your position right? You want to make any amendments to that? And what would you say to that concern?
Sure. No, I'm not saying any of that stuff. The government is doing horrific things with or without me. I'm not in control of the Federal Reserve printing. The government's over $34 trillion in debt. The Social Security is going to be through the roof. It is literally a ticking time bomb. It's unsustainable. The liabilities are unpayable. So this is not really a matter of me wishing for anything. I'm being very real about how horrific the government spending is, how horrific the police state is, how horrific the global wars are. This is not a matter of me downplaying that, but rather I use it as an opportunity to point to people and say, listen, this is the nature of the state. It is not this cartoonish 8th grade textbook version of, oh, there's an eagle and there's a flag and, oh, isn't the military cool? Isn't our government great? No, this is a mafia. you. This is a group of people who will literally sell your children to slavery. They will put your children into slavery for generations to come, and they want you dead. They want you living in a pod. They want you eating bugs. They don't care about you. And I take that not because I wish for that future, but because I need to warn people and let them know now. Because if you do understand our principles and you do understand the economics, then you can start to exit. You can do things that involve protecting yourself against calamity, whether that's thinking through sound money or doing a little bit of prepping or getting your kids out of school. You can do some things that actually start to get the state controls out of there while we do our darndest otherwise to try to stop the total destruction of all of our wealth and the entire collapse of the American empire, which might be inevitable at this point because it's just that toxic and the federal government is just that evil. So it's really something that we have to take seriously in terms of those ramifications. But we do not then go and say, well, the government that has wreaked all this havoc is going to be trustworthy with the solution. And they're going to magically, if we say, hey, federal government, you'll get it this right this time. Here's more power to control us, to spy on us, to control borders, to do all this other stuff, like as if that is going to suddenly make us free from this enslavement. The only thing that gets us there is a consistent advocacy toward liberty through property rights, through free markets, through ending the wars, through ending the domestic wars or the war on drugs, through getting kids out of the brainwashing centers. And if we are adamant and persistent about educating people on those things, it will be irresistible because the pain will come. It is not a matter of if, but it is present. People are already suffering from all the inflation. They can't afford groceries, and it's only a matter of time. Bitcoin's all the way up, right? The Federal Reserve, their bank bailout stuff was to end on March 11th. So this is real stuff. This is real life. We are facing some serious crises. And if we don't take the time to share our knowledge and say, hey, libertarians know what's up because we understand ethics, we understand economics, and this is what's really going on, we are going to be thanked. And very often, we are thanked because when we show people the exit, they benefit from that. They have a better life because they can do things to help protect themselves from the intentional inflationary policies of the Federal Reserve. They can do things to protect themselves and their loved ones by learning, firearm skills and defending themselves because we believe in the right to bear arms and that self-defense is a right of property rights. So we can relate to people on their problems all day, no problem. But we have to make sure that whatever we're advocating for is a non-state solution, that it's cutting the size, scope, and power of the state, that we are not making excuses and saying we'll just shift the chairs around and we'll just make the schools a little nicer for a little bit because think of the children. No, we don't need that. To think of the children means to get them out of the abuse of public schools. It means to get them out of the state programming and the brainwashing. And it means to take care of your own and your family, and you look for ways to exit as best you can. Again, if there's tough situations for the people, I empathize with that completely, and I do my best to share with them resources where there's low cost, no cost alternatives so that they can get their kids out and they can be on a better path without the government indoctrinating their kids into this traumatic status brainwashing. And so I think, if we're on that same path, then we are aligned. But where we wouldn't be aligned, again, not saying you are, is if there is this compromise, if there is this idea that, to appeal to regular people, we have to empathize with, what if there's crackheads in the schools? Nobody is doing anything as it relates to that. It's just the government already has different rules for schools. They already exist. There's nothing to do about that. And some stupid police will, for some reason, let a homeless crackhead in or whatever. Okay, cool. Get your kids out of there. That's always the goal. Use what's bad to remind people the state is a tragedy of the commons. And the only way we're getting out of this is if we have a principled approach and we take as best we can our lives, our wallets out of this paradigm. And the sooner we do that, the sooner we're going to get to a freer future or at least a remnant.
So few things there. So I'm kind of going to go in reverse order. So we can simultaneously tell people to pull their kids out of public schools if they're being actively harmed by something in that school, whether it's something as dramatic as they're letting crackheads walk loiter around or something like that, or in, the other ways that the public schools can do, whether it's through harmful curriculums or enforcing like vax mandates or mask mandates, or there's all sorts of ways in which schools will try to really push different types of harm upon the students. And so I think we always lead with get them out, but then you can also simultaneously support people's voices when they are crying out to these public institutions and saying no, if you're going to force our kids to come here, we're going to hold you to a standard of, not, committing, not exposing them to or actively participating in, major acts of aggression against them. So I don't think I don't see that as a contradiction that like you can't do both. As this pertains to the broader issue of like immigration and borders, I mean, like, listen, I think that some of the things we talk about are just unrealistic, right? And they're just points that are being made. Like when Dave Smith says, let's bring the troops home and put them on the border.
He didn't fucking say
I said
that.
this to him last night. I was like, well, that's not
I have the
happening.
exact
like,
fucking quote he said.
For many reasons, that's not happening, okay? And for many, I mean, one, there's just no way we're bringing the troops home anytime soon.
Take a look at this.
Two,
all the fucking
I agree with
memes.
Dave's point that I think the state is,
no, it's not there.
whether it's super consciously,
The answer
like
is
there's a
take our entire
actual
fucking
written out
military
plan,
and
or
put
if
them
it's
on our
just the
border and
incentives of a
secure
lot of
our border.
individuals acting.
That's
I think
verbatim
they kind
the
of think more
quote
it's
from Dave
a
Smith.
mixture, but more the latter.
He's lying. He's lying
I think they
about
are
it.
incentivized to,
No, he's just saying,
like,
take your
hey,
troops
we all these
home.
interventions
Just take your troops
in
home.
Latin and
No,
South
he didn't
America.
fucking
We
say
have the drug
that.
war, and that's good. We're going to create, we're creating the circumstances where we can increase our power and increase our control and increase people's dependency upon us by having this mass, crisis at this state border of people trying to flood in. And so, yeah, I think, and I told Dave, like, I think it's kind of silly to like, well, you're going to ask the people who you think are behind this to stop it. Like that just seems like a complete waste of time to me. But that's not in conflict with just the, hypothetical statement of like, oh, well, like when we're going out and talking to people and they're like, well, what's the libertarian positions on all of this? And you're like, well, listen, I can simultaneously say, listen, guys, listen, no one is more on the nose than me, right? Like, the name of my podcast is the Biblical Anarchy Podcast. So I don't shy away from any of this. I'm never disguising what my true intentions or my true beliefs are. Like people know it. Like when I tell, like, my podcast has been circulated. Really funny. My podcast has become known and circulated around the members of my church, including my pastor. So I'm having like conversations with my people I go to church with, people I've known for like, even like my Sunday school teacher from when I was a kid who goes to my church. I'm having conversations with them about like what anarchism is and what voluntarism is, what Austrian economics is and things like that. So like no one's confused about what my philosophical presuppositions are and what I'm advocating for. But then if we're talking about like, just in the land of hypothetical in terms of like, well, what do we do about the immigration system? What do we do about the all these wars going on? It's a talking point. And I think people are like, they're getting so caught up and hung up and upset over a talking point. It's just a talking point to say, to be like, you know what,
I do
like,
enjoy fish.
this isn't going to
I had
happen.
some fish recently.
But like, if I could press a button tomorrow that said, we're just going to bring the troops home, and like, and when you're talking to, if you're talking to conservatives, say, listen, like, let's bring the troops home, and like, you're concerned about the immigration system. Like, shouldn't it, like, isn't it kind of weird? Isn't it kind of dumb that we are fighting all these wars, all over the world? Our military can touch like 3/4 of the soil of this green earth, and yet we have this. We can't secure our borders. Like, shouldn't we at least be saying like, hey, if you're going to have this military and if you're going to exist, like, stop being over 3/4 of the world and come home and just protect our borders. Like, that is not my ideal solution. But like, if I had a magic button, or we're just using it as a hypothetical, to be like, wouldn't that be a huge reduction of the state? Wouldn't it be such a huge, like to bring the military home to end the American imperialism abroad? Now, listen, that doesn't mean that suddenly there's not going to be blowback to, the military enforcing the border. That would have blowback. And I talked to Dave about that too. We said, like, listen, that's going to be a problem, right? We don't want the excesses that we know are going to happen with that. But again, this is all in the realm of a hypothetical. And B, there is just no perfect way. Like, no matter if premise one is we will eventually at some point reach a private property society. Like if we accept that as true, like at some point we're going to get there. Well, there's what follows from that. I think just we have to be honest is that there is no path from where we are now to that doesn't involve like, you know, as we move towards that, but it's not going to be this perfect, beautiful tapestry of like in our minds of like everything gets rolled back peacefully and in a very nice and systematic way across the board all at the same time without like peaks and valleys along the way. And if you try talking to people about that, because people want to know like, oh, you believe in this kind of society, how do we get there? Like, you're just trying to kind of talk to people in language that they can understand and get them just to start dipping their toes in the water. And if you start saying, listen, we got to abolish everything right now, you lose people. If you start making talking points, well, listen, what if we just did this as a start? Then you keep the conversation going, and then you can have more conversations about that from there. And that's what I see people like me and Dave trying to do. And I feel like people like you, Jack, and others.
Oh yeah, this is staying on the channel.
It's fine. If you want to take a different approach, that's fine. But I'm not seeing the problem with what we're advocating, what the way we're trying to go about advocating for a better future. And by the way, I'll let you have the last word on this, and then I'm standing like 10 feet away from my credentialing booth here from my state convention here in PA. So I'm going to have to go and do that here soon. But I want to give you the last word, Jack. And then maybe I'll do another spaces sometime this weekend when I have the time.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I understand where you're coming from, wanting to reach out to people and relate to them on their terms, not overload them with a bunch of theory and stuff like that. I 100% get that. So when it comes to talking about these things, no one has to, as an individual, go and start going through the whole history of economics and all political philosophy and everything. They only have to talk about what's relevant to the person they're talking to. And in many cases, it could be relating to the income tax being overbearing. It could be relating about inflation. It could be relating about the annoyance that the government's sending money to everybody else around the world. We're all here starving at home because of inflation. So it's really not difficult to relate to people when you find that common ground. The question then is just, what are the advocacies that are being said, and are those instilling in people a sense of government not being the solution to the problem? And so if you don't have that psychological backdrop in what you're presenting, it's not actually making the person more principled. It's making them think, oh, okay, well, you know, the government could solve this issue if we just gave them the power. You know, I just wish the government would act this way in the way that benefits me. And if that is the outcome of it, then we haven't moved the cultural needle forward. We haven't caused someone to really challenge the nature of government power and challenge the nature of what the government's doing in a consistent way. And so with the work that I like to do, I like to be holistic because I have that ability. Not everybody has the ability to talk about every single issue, but with my background experience and things like that, I can do a lot of different topics. So I always try to find what it is that someone is most struggling with. I look specifically at, you know, whatever they need to overcome. It could be as simple as who will build the roads to, you know, something about the nature of private regulation. Like, you know, how do we deal with, you know, people just having security in their products and food, and just relating to simple things like, you know, do you go to the best restaurant in town when you want to go, shopping? Do you look for the place that has the 1-star reviews, or do you listen to friends and look at reviews online and look for, okay, what has, decent reviews, right? And you just get people to empathize to their own thinking about what it is that they do, and you get them to have economic thinking through empathy. And, outside of that, those type of interpersonal relationships, that stuff, when we're talking about broad spectrum outreach, we're talking about, tweets and videos and viral content. One of the things that I found a lot of success in was when I created the 2016 viral trend with the taxation assessed thing on Anarchy Ball. That worked so well because I loaded that statement within this thing that said 7 things every child must hear, right? And because of that, people kind of skimmed over where the taxation and stuff part wasn't, when it just said, you're good, or, I love you, and things like that, right? It was an encouraging meme with a little secret taxation and stuff thing. So that went as viral as it did, and it caused a lot of people to be stirred. So sometimes you have to take something that is kind of radically principled for liberty and jarring to get the conversation going, because we're dealing with an insanely difficult brainwashing regime. The government has so much control over people's minds through public school and the media, and you watch the Super Bowl and the military's got ads and they're putting up billboards everywhere. It's a constant state of propaganda. I mean, even the news, right, with Operation Mockingbird and the CIA and putting in different people to give the deep state's talking points, it's a flurry. So we're in an ideological war. This is an info war. And if we want to win that, the only way to overcome the propaganda is with robust, consistent principles that people can stick to and resist any temptation to give up power to the state and not make any exception, because they understand it and they have internalized it as their own ethical system. And again, it may take time to get there because there's a lot to undo, but if we plant those seeds and we never let go of that plant, and we say we are going to keep stewarding it, watering it, and encouraging people to think consistently and principally and thinking about the government getting out of our lives and wallets, we can get that cultural change. But if we deviate from there, it's no surprise. Just like everything in the left-right paradigm, you can vote red, you can vote blue, and the government grows, right? As long as there's exceptions, then the government will grow. So we want to leave the thinking that has exceptions to it. And if we can achieve that, I genuinely believe we can see a cultural renaissance like we've seen in Argentina.
That's correct.
All right, good stuff. Well, yeah, I think, listen, like I said, I'm not one to shy away from leading with the extreme, right? When people hear the word anarchy, it cuts right through. You kind of start there in the extreme, and then it's kind of, I think it's always the way I kind of approach things. Almost like I hate to use the phraseology because we're all libertarians here, but it's kind of like a good cop, bad cop kind of thing. You start out with I want to privatize everything, and they're like, "Well, wow, that's crazy." It's like, okay, what if we just did this?
Ace might join in on the Discord.
You're trying to push people, right? And it's kind of like a give and take, and you try to. And that's kind of what happened to me. Like, remember when I first was introduced to this stuff, I was like, "You people are crazy," and I find people who would have oh, that's a little bit more reasonable. I could get behind that, and you kind of get slowly. Not in a way that violates the net, but slowly drugged into our world of crazy voluntarism and peaceful interaction. So,
rather than NAP,
but Jack, I appreciate you coming up and talking. There's definitely a lot we agree on, and I think the disagreements are fun to hash out as well.
They don't know what they're talking about.
I know there's more people here that requested that want to talk. I wish I had more time. Maybe I'll try to find time to do another spaces this weekend and get a little bit more into how we handle immigration and public property thing and stuff, because I do think that's important.
One of my videos
I know some people are like, can we please stop talking about this topic? And I'm like, yeah, listen, like there is a point where we maybe beat a dead horse too much. But
whatever you want to say about
them,
I like them.
This is going to keep being in the news cycle. This is something people are going to keep non-libertarians are going to keep asking about how do we handle this crisis. So, and it's clear there's a lot of things I think libertarians are united on. How do we respond to this? It's clear that we have a lot of disagreements on how to handle.
I'm going to speak for like another half an hour. Yeah, we'll do a Discord after party. Gotta delete all these fucking retarded memes that I put on the screen so I don't have them up for next time. Here. What's this one? The fuck is that? Okay. Yeah. Alright, okay, yeah, so let's see here. Ooh. Throw this up there. Correct link. This is the correct link. Maybe just hop on there and I'll hop on when I get back. Alrighty. I just need to go from the Discord, like, application to Discord on web. Because the Discord application lags when I'm trying to stream it. Kill that. Up on here. Discord. Oh, I probably shouldn't be on. Or DRB, rather.
And who wants, and he's saying this stupid bullshit. Oh, well, God, and we'll, talk to each other and love and, just understand. No, you stupid fucking idiot. That's not what we were asking you. We're talking about a situation where two people trying to paint the wall in different colors, and who gets to pick the color, and he's just saying this stupid bullshit.
The final answer is just, they'll figure it out. They'll figure it out.
And wait, is Zulu streaming this? I'm hearing my own voice.
Yes, I am. It's coming through somebody's mic.
Yeah, I preemptively muted it so I didn't hear the voices.
Anyways, the beginning was literally gold. I think it was Zulu's easiest win. It was insane. It was so clear win. There's no, controversy about that. It was insane.
Yeah,
I mean,
showed up late.
he denied the fucking law of the excluded middle, halfway through. It's like,
He did.
how do you even proceed from here? And this is the guy who's supposed to be
fucking
steel manning my positions. He was like, "Don't worry, I've read all the positions from Zulu and Ace, and I can steel man it all, and we'll get Dave's answer to it." It's like he doesn't even think the law of the excluded middle is a thing. How does he expect that that's going to happen?
This is the guy who supposedly represented Ace's and Zulu's ideas. And guys, I don't know if you noticed, but his podcast has his YouTube channel has 30 to 100 views, 50 views on average. And Dave Smith went on this podcast that's watched by 30 people, but he refuses to go to Zulu's stream.
Yeah, and my top video, by the way, breaches Dave Smith's top 5 videos. I'm not a nobody. And everybody keeps coming in with this bullshit where it's oh, he's not going to debate a nobody. And it's no, I get pretty decent views. There's top views of this video where this stream 67. That's not bad for live viewership.
Nope, it's not. It's not. Yeah, so we were talking about before you arrived here how the guy didn't know what legal terror was. He had no idea what it is. That's why he said the bullshit such as
I'd say Dave didn't come onto your podcast or the live stream because he just wants to talk to people who agree with him. Jack isn't small, right? His wife Fo isn't small either. They're pretty big. So I think he just wants to talk with people who won't argue against him. And if they do argue, it's kind of something he can control and manage, because I think he kind of knows he fucked up and he doesn't want to say he did.
Yeah, it's controlled opposition, basically. The guy literally said, let's send our entire fucking military to their border, to our border, mind you, and let's secure our border. And people were gaslighting me saying, no, he didn't say that, that's a straw man. Verbatim, he said that.
That's not militarize the border. What do you mean? That's a perfect summary of exactly what he said.
I never said. What do you mean? I said to send the military to the border. I never said that. What do you mean? I never claimed that you're too caught up in Turi. And I always defended to Turi. What do you mean?
Thanks for the $5, Danny Cat. Do you assume all public property is unowned? Couldn't the people who maintain a public park own parts of the park individually? So basically, prima facie, the assumption would be whoever's using the thing has ownership over it, right? Unless there's evidence to the contrary, right? Because we have evidence that they are definitely using it right now, so they're possessing it, so the evidence is pointing to them being the initial possessor, unless we know that they stole it from somebody. Now, it's not the case that all public property is unowned. For instance, there's cases of eminent domain where we definitely know, hey, this was stolen from a specific individual, and that specific individual still owns it. Where Dave Smith trips up is he has this nonsense theory of theft is bad because it's retroactively enslaving a person. No, that isn't why theft is bad. Theft is bad because it initiates a conflict in the here and now, not because it retroactively enslaves someone. And that's how he justifies his... I don't even know what he believes. He said he denies that the taxpayers own it as a group. But then who does own it, right? It's either one person owns it, nobody owns it, or a group of people own it, right? And he just... Which one is it? Group of people own it? That means you have a contradiction. So, out. One person owns it. That means it's going to be something like eminent domain, where you know the specific person who owns it. Or nobody owns it, which is the case for a lot of it, where you just can't track down a specific person who owns it. Then it's unowned. It's open for homesteading.
Work it out between us because we're both the owners. But that's a non-answer to the question of who is right in the dispute, right? That's what law is supposed to deal with. Like in a conflict, which party is the just victor? Who is supposed to win? Like, who is the correct person there? And it's a non-answer. Like if you apply that to any other legal example, like let's say I'm getting mugged, what? We just have to work it out. Me and the mugger, we just have to come to an agreement, right? Over who gets the wallet, right? Because no, I'm the owner of the wallet. I win. I kill him. I take my wallet back. Die.
It's a great counterexample, actually.
Contractual setups to try to establish collective ownership. They pain me to no end. Like I hear them in previous debates where people talk about like homeowners associations, how that's like collective ownership. Like, no, the fuck, it's not. These are like contracts applying to private ownership. These aren't fucking collective ownership, but everybody seems to think it's collective ownership.
But they're held up by love. It's the same type of thing which is behind the idea behind the free bankers, where they think fractional reserve banking is fine because everybody agrees to it. It's like, well, okay, irrelevant. You need a property theory which assigns a specific owner of each individual good at any given time. You can't have, well, we all just agree on it and we'll just all agree to it forever. Like, no, it doesn't work. Contract theory is not antecedent to property theory. Property theory comes first. You can't have a contract theory property where it's everybody agrees to it, and therefore contradictions are fine suddenly. Like, no.
If you had let me speak, I was going to mention that it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter if everyone agrees or not, because if everyone agrees, there's no practical point to talk about property rights in the first place, because it's a conflict avoiding norm. If everyone just agrees to use the resource however they want, then well, sure, yeah, everyone agrees. There's no problem there.
It's a conflict avoiding norm, but why would a market support such a norm?
Well,
oh my god, it's the low quality bait.
I feel
It reminds me of this argument someone gave about the Borg. But like the Borg are just a part of a hive mind. Sure, if humanity was just a hive mind, then communal ownership could work. But even then, that's not communal ownership. That's one person dictating through all of their little ant workers.
Yeah, it would be like saying it's a communal ownership between me and my hand and my mouth when I'm drinking a beer. It's like, no, it's me owning it. It's the queen of the hive who owns it, right?
Let's say that
legally speaking, the Borg is one individual with a bunch of body parts that are shaped like people. Like legally speaking, that's what it is.
Ah, comrade, we will collectivize everything by making one mind.
The problem is
deserted island. If someone homesteads a piece of land, but another person can utilize that land and produce like 10 times more production, why would society defend that land for him just because he homesteaded it?
This is irrelevant. You're talking about how do you enforce property rights, which is a different question to what are the property rights. Yeah. Like, so the way you enforce property rights is you shoot the guy. If somebody is trying to invade against you, you shoot him. And if you can't shoot him, well, then you can't enforce your property right. What is even the claim here?
So you're claiming that society should shoot the guy that's more productive with the land.
If he's trying to invade your property rights, yes, shoot him. Shoot him to death. Shoot him until he is dead.
The market doesn't really care about theft. I mean, you can obviously tell because
what are you talking about? If somebody's coming up to you, it doesn't matter how rich they are.
No, it isn't.
Right? If somebody's raping me, I'm going to shoot them in the face.
This is why I don't like Austrians. You guys got the market principles wrong. The market only cares about profit. It doesn't
irrelevant. Irrelevant.
No, you're making it. You're artificially making it irrelevant. What's irrelevant is
no. I'm not artificially doing anything. I'm just telling you what is just.
Okay, then No, that's not just. You're just declaring it as just. You can't just declare something. I can just
I'm not
declare
just declaring
profitability as
it.
just. Guess
I have
what?
an entire fucking
Evolution was
theory behind
cyber-
it. Like, are you new here or something?
You're, is it Austrian theory? Because all of that is invalid. All of that's invalid.
Man acts. Hold on. Man acts. What is invalid about that?
Calm down.
What's in because just do a simple thought experiment.
Are you acting right now?
The system has to be sustainable. So a system has to be
Man
sustainable.
acts. What
If
is
you're gonna
invalid
have
about
a
that?
system
You said
that
the whole
defends
thing is
property
invalid.
rights
Man
based
acts. Where is the invalidity?
You just gonna interrupt me? Or?
If you can't answer that
Yes.
question in 5 seconds after I stop speaking, you're banned from the server. So, man acts. What is invalid about that proposition?
So what? You gotta go with the action axiom and
All right, you're banned.
like the ultimate goal too. Like all of this doesn't.
Bro, it's a
make-
simple
all-
question. Answer. Holy shit.
This guy was from.
Angry.
This guy was the guy from the YouTube chat. He was just spewing very low quality bait.
Yeah, not worth it.
Happy Women's History Month, guys.
Don't remind me.
I love women.
All of them?
We should respect all women.
Women
Don't
don't
very much
exist.
like women.
Is this the largest Zulu VC that's ever happened?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would give up ANCAP.
We're all
You know what
rallying.
this means?
But,
Since this is such a
they're on.
large Zulu VC, I think we should have a poll on vape reviews.
Not doing fucking vape reviews. I'm
Please
not a
no.
Democrat.
I'm gonna fucking kill myself.
I personally like the cigars. They give me more cancer per breath.
More bang for your buck.
Yeah,
More important.
Don't aren't because aren't you even? Aren't you?
More importantly,
cancer.
Zulu, this thing wasn't like scheduled within like more than 24 hours, right?
No, it was like earlier today. He was like, "Hey, do you want to come on my fucking space?" And I was like, "Oh, that's probably going to be too late because he's an American." Then somebody, like, I think it was Input Error,
Well,
was
then-
like, "Hey, are you going to show up to this?" It's like, soon. I was like, "Oh, yeah, it is soon." Yeah, I suppose I'll go to that. And then, like, within 15 minutes before
Well,
the thing, I was like,
look how many
quickly
people
putting
showed up.
together a thumbnail. And I was like, "Oh, shit. I gotta get a thumbnail for this thing."
Yeah,
And he didn't even let Ace on or me. Like he didn't let anyone else
Yeah.
on. He like there was 3 speakers in the entire thing. It was you, that guy who denied the LEM, and then Jack. And then
And it was
everyone else was just,
mostly
was
like
killed
the
by
guy who was
shut
hosting it.
up.
He was just kind of bloviating for like the first 20 minutes. And it's like, you're not going to get through us all.
Yapping.
Fluent in
I just
Japanese.
think
I don't know.
Kind of conversation.
I feel very unsatisfied because he actually didn't answer to anything. He didn't answer to anything that was discussed there. It just left hanging in there, and someone else came and they just completely left it there. So it's just unresolved, and the guy still doesn't know what legal term means. The guy still doesn't understand conflict resolution. The guy still doesn't understand what property is.
He doesn't really understand what it is.
Too much.
They'll just figure it out.
During the beginning of the debate, right? And I got to use none of them. Like I have the LEM, the non-answer. My wife and I just work it out. The contracts are not joint ownership. And then his claim, normal people don't care about abstract theory consensus. And I'm like, who cares what normal people think? Normal people accept gun control, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, Taiwan, the drug war, and COVID lockdowns. Who cares what they think? They're all wrong.
You know what's
I want to jump in here real quick. I'm obviously going back and forth a little bit with Dave now, and I think I've boiled down his argument or what he's been trying to say basically down to, well, if your theory will result in an unmitigated disaster, was his direct quote, then the theory is wrong. And I've literally pushed him on this in a Twitter thread, and he refused to respond to it. I said, well, what's your standard for what constitutes an unmitigated disaster? And why is the policies that RVMLA is currently implementing, do they not count as an unmitigated disaster? Because right now, if you live in Argentina, the poverty rate in Argentina has gone up by 10%. So 10% of people that were not in poverty when he came into office are now in poverty. Okay, so for them, what's happened so far is probably considered an unmitigated disaster. I mean, if you've gone from not being in poverty to being in poverty, you're probably like, shit, this is not going too well for me. So should we oppose RVMLA's policy because at present they're resulting in in a disaster? Like, what exactly classifies as a disaster? Any libertarian policy that we would try to implement, whether it's borders, whether it's welfare, whatever it is, in the short term is most likely going to result in a negative outcome. Even if it was, ending the Fed, we'd probably see a major recession in the United States that would cause a lot of people to become unemployed and lose their jobs and fall into poverty. But we understand that ending the Fed is ultimately the right thing to do.
Yeah, this is like basically the entire point behind Austrian business cycle theory, is that yes, the boom times are, it feels great and everything, but you're not allocating resources correctly. The boom is bad. Exactly. It's good that you have the bust. That is when you're starting to actually move resources back to where they should be. And this occurs all over the place. Whenever you have this massive shift where the state reduces their control over something, you have that bust because means have been drastically misallocated. And the solution isn't, well, we just need more of a boom. We just need to drink more and get rid of the hangover. No, that isn't the solution. You need to get through the hangover.
He's literally
and all of these people are supposed to be
Keynesianism. What he's advocating for. It's literally just Keynesianism on borders. It's like, well, we're having this boom at the moment, and if we stop having the boom or do stuff that's going to reverse the boom, then bad things might happen. And it's like, well, his solution is, well, we just can't stop having the boom. We just need to keep the boom going on endlessly. It's literally what he's advocating for.
You know what's really funny about that too, because like Dave will position that, oh well, the crackhead in the school analogy. You talk about like, well, this would be an unmitigated disaster, but there's many unmitigated disasters that I would consider from reductio ad absurdum from the net taxpayer theory. But he doesn't think that theory is wrong just because that would lead to like absurd conclusions.
I made this point in a post as well. I was like, well, this whole crackhead in the school theory has gone from being a reductio ad absurdum to what Dave Smith seems to think actually would happen if we were to abolish borders. Like the whole point of that was supposed to be, in the extreme case, what you're saying is we would allow a crackhead to go into a school. No one was actually saying that this is what's going to happen. And I don't think anyone actually believes it's what's going to happen. Like if you actually implemented a libertarian policy on public property, what would almost immediately happen is, as I think Ace, you've said multiple times, is more than likely all the school property would be homesteaded by the teachers that are currently on it and working.
Or perhaps by the parents by proxy of their children, perhaps.
Exactly. Like one of those scenarios.
Or even just businesses. Like this is just a general rule of economics. Yeah. That the second you have this open borders where anybody can homestead, it's going to go toward its most value productive route, right? It's going to go there because you have economic calculation suddenly. Like even if the homeless hordes manage to negotiate across the entire nation that they're all going to homestead everything, even then, Amazon's going to go, hey, I want this highway because it's very valuable to me, so I'm going to buy off all these individual homeless bums, right? Because first, they're going to sleep through the whole thing, right? They're not going to be there to homestead it all. And second, even if they do homestead some amount of it, if it's actually useful, if there should be a road there, or if there can even be something better there, then somebody's going to pay for it. An entrepreneur's going to come along and say, hey, I want to buy that off you for 10 grand or whatever. And that's more money than the bum has ever seen in his life, right? So he's going to go, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
The crackhead goes and he's like, it's my classroom now. And I'm like, hang on, I got 30 kids. If I just give you like 15 grams of crack, you'll leave the classroom. It's mine now. And he's like, I'll agree to that right away. And now the classroom is in the hands of a good, productive citizen. See?
We're talking about homeless bums here. These people don't have low time preference. Okay, if they homestead a section of the border that someone thinks is valuable, you could probably sell them one needle's worth of heroin, and they would give it to you. Okay, like this idea that they're going to hold the border in perpetuity, this random plot of land that they can't really do anything with other than shoot up heroin on. Like they don't need it. They're going to sell it to someone. And I think this is more a general point that Dave fails on. It's like his whole argument that we should mimic what private property owners would do. It's like, well, that's just the ECP, mate. Like you can't know what the private owners would do with the property. If you could, then what you're basically saying is that socialism works. Right? Socialism on borders, apparently, according to Dave, works. And it's like, well, okay, so if it works on borders, why doesn't it work for other stuff too?
There is the issue that Dave actually never responds to our arguments. He doesn't answer anything about the contradiction implied by collective property rights. he did an attempt of responding to something during his stream with Bob Murphy, which is where he gave the hypothetical of like the park in New York and it was owned by a private establishment at one point. What if the state takes it, confiscates it, and then apparently border Libertarians give it to hold? But this is such a basic logic that we never said. I don't know anyone that has said that to him. Nobody ever claimed that if the state confiscates land, then we would just defend, yes, if the hobo homesteads it, the hobo owners. Like, no, we would tell that the original owner that got confiscated, that his land got stolen, should get his land back. And he gave this hypothetical that we never made, and then everyone was like, "Yes, Dave Smith's hypothetical is great. It's but it doesn't." And we keep telling that this hypothetical is completely irrelevant to the point we're trying to make, and there's no counter argument to that. Literally.
Yeah. Can I actually make a point there real quick? So yes. I think Stu just touched on something super important, which is that that equivocation between property the government has seized from people and property which the government merely claimed to own but did not seize from an owner, that is completely necessary for net taxpayer theory and arguably sort of its cardinal sin. Like that's actually why it's wrong, is because there's a difference between property that was taken and property that was merely claimed. And so I think that's why Dave doesn't address that point, is because if he abandons it, he's abandoned his entire theory.
And on top of that, I think there's you made a really, really good point there, because on one hand, right, okay, well, we'll talk about state seized land like from eminent domain, where they steal a person's land, the land that was privately owned by a person prior, and then the state comes and takes it from them. It's like, well, the taxpayers wouldn't have a right to that land, right? Like, just because if the state used it to like maintain it or upkeep it, that's still rightfully the previous owner's property. Or on the other hand, if the land was just claimed by the state and the state's just forestalling people from using it, I don't see how the taxpayers can logically have a claim to land that's unhomesteaded just because their money is being used to forestall other people from homesteading it. So in both scenarios, it kind of breaks down.
I think Dave's entire strategy around this whole conversation has literally been he'll see like myself or Ace or Zulu, mention him in a comment, I guess pin him or whatever, and he'll drop some kind of, unsubstantive zinger in the replies, just calling us an idiot or whatever, and ratio us because, obviously he has a massive fan base compared to all three of us, and think, total Dave Smith win because, he's got way more likes on his comment than we did. And that's apparently what proves who won the argument. And then to go on, Bob Murphy's show or Jacob Winograd's show, who are just going to softball him with easy questions and, offer more or less controlled opposition because allegedly Jacob and Bob disagree on it. I think no evidence whatsoever that either of them have actually offered a counter argument that they actually agree with to his position. And they're basically just controlled opposition as far as I'm concerned, and act like he's won the debate because he's debated two people that have offered, or not debated, but had a discussion with two people that have offered pretty weak defenses of our position, and then dunked on a bunch of us on Twitter with zingers that aren't substantive replies to what we've said. It's just a really, really lousy, weaselly way to go about it.
Yeah, why is there a middleman to these arguments? Why do our arguments have to be filtered through someone else?
Why does he need or Bob?
You're not famous enough.
Lego seems to disagree with the fact that there's a contradiction in collective property, and I think he wants to debate it in VC. So
we summon him.
Yeah, he's in VC right now.
Speak.
He's just been.
He's muted.
He hasn't wanted to interrupt.
Okay, let's let him talk.
Oh, this is.
We can't hear him if he's speaking. He's gonna have to type unless his microphone.
Oh no, I was just giving y'all a moment. You're still talking.
Go ahead.
A moment of silence.
Yeah, I would just say that there is no. What was that?
I was saying a moment of silence.
Oh, okay. Yeah, moment of silence. So I would just say there is no contradiction unless we assume your concept of ownership, this idea of exclusive control, which is not a necessary way of defining ownership.
I mean, call it schmonership. It doesn't matter, right? Ultimately, we have this problem that we're trying to face. That because we have scarcity, there can be conflicts. And therefore, we need to assign exclusive ownership over different means, such that we can avoid conflicts. Call it schmonership or blownership or anything you want. The problem still persists.
Well, we don't have to have this exclusive control to avoid
Yes, you do.
conflict. We can just
Because otherwise you
either use
can't.
contract or-
Otherwise you can't avoid conflict, right? I explained this in the space, right? If you have a group of people A through Z, we don't even know that group property is invalid yet at this point in the course where I give this. We don't even know that, and we're like, okay, let's just assume that a group of people have the right to control a stick A through Z, and A wants to use it as spearfish. B doesn't want this to happen. How do we resolve this conflict? There are only two options we can have. Either the spearfishing happens, or it doesn't happen, right? If it happens, great. That means A owns it, but wait a minute, B doesn't own it then, because he doesn't have the right to control it. Whoops daisies, let's try the other option. Okay, spearfishing doesn't happen. That means B owns it, great. Whoops daisies, A doesn't own it then, because he doesn't have the right to control it. Call it whatever you want, schmonership, blownership, gonership, whatever, right? This problem persists. We don't even know that group property is invalid yet, and yet we've found that it leads to a contradiction, whichever option we pick, when there's a conflict between group members. And this is easy to see when we assume Crusoe and Friday collectively own everything, right? It becomes clear that, hey, they can't avoid conflicts. There are no property rights anymore. When you have group property, to whatever extent you have it, there are no property rights.
You can just agree on a set of rules that essentially regulate use so that there would be no contradiction or
Sure,
conflict.
so long as they
unless
agree,
somebody
it's
is doing-
fine. If they agree, then it's all fine, right? But when they disagree, that's when law studies that situation. When they don't agree on how things should be done. We only in law, as jurists, we're only studying those situations where there is a conflict, not those situations where A and B agree how to use it. Yeah, great, easy, right? We're studying when they disagree.
There would be usage norms, though. There would just be a set of rules that are set in place so that if there is any disagreement, you would just refer back to the rules, which would determine use. So you would still have conflict avoidance without there being anyone that has universal control.
There's still a conflict there, though, right? And either you have the right to control it, or you don't. Those are the only options available.
What are some of the usage norms that you set out? Those are synthetic norms. So you need to have natural norms. That's like the final layer before anything else. Like, because let's say I agree, right, with my friend that we can use the cell phone. You know, one of us gets 50 minutes, the other one gets 50 minutes. But if I dispute the 50 minutes rule entirely, then that's not grounded in any kind of natural basis, right? That's an artificial rule, and those rules can be set out by property owners, but if I dispute it, then one of us has to be the property owner who has the right to set that rule, right? We can't be the two of us because then we can't resolve the dispute. There has to be a natural law here, and the natural law necessitates that there's an individual owner, because if there's more than one owner, then you can't resolve the dispute between two owners.
There's no need for a natural law that you go back to. It can just be whatever the society comes to through their form of government.
What's that? Why there has to be a natural law? Like,
no, you didn't.
You can't resolve this question. You end up with no answer, and if there's no answer, then you're done.
I just gave you an answer without any appeal to natural law.
Yeah, but the society appealing to society doesn't give you any kind of true answer here, because the society could be wrong, right? There is
no true answer. There is no like objectively true answer.
Well, that's clearly incorrect.
So it's all just subjective, just opinion.
I mean, you presuppose that
So
your
hold on,
position
what
is
is
the
it?
natural
What
law.
is it that you are actually claiming here? Because you're saying, well, we can solve this other way. Is that objectively correct? Is it just your opinion that this is true?
It's objective that we can solve for this, but there's not a.
Oh, but I thought there was no objectively correct answer.
There are many answers. There's no one true, like, this is the way of doing it.
So it's probably true that there's no one objectively true answer.
Yeah. I didn't say there's nothing that's objective, and I never said there's nothing that is true. I'm just saying that there is no one true way of determining ownership. You can determine it in lots of ways.
But you just said there's something that's objectively true.
Yeah, I agree. There are things that are objectively true. I'm saying that there's not one correct way that's logically necessary for determining ownership.
So there is a correct answer, because there is an actual question we're trying to answer here. And the answer is, what is the correct way to resolve disputes, resolve conflicts? What is the way to resolve conflict? What is the conflict avoiding norm? And there is a norm for avoiding conflict. Other answers do not avoid conflicts. The one way to avoid conflicts is to assign property owners that are individual and exclusive, right? To follow the non-aggression principle, right? If you involve collective ownership, you can't follow the non-aggression principle, and therefore you can't resolve conflicts, and you don't have a conflict resolving norm. This is the logically entailed answer of this question. There's no other answers to this.
Yeah, so to sort of build on that, the way I ground my entire property theory is in the NEP. The thing I say is, if you have the NEP, you get everything else for free, right? All I need to do is show that the NEP is correct. And the way I do that is through argumentum e contrario. So I say, right, we have this problem of law, scarcity is a thing, so there can be conflicts. Okay, what are the different ways that we could hope to deal with the question of conflicts? There is either, one, we have the law of the jungle, just anything goes, do whatever, who cares about justifiability? There's two, the NEP, which is don't initiate conflicts. Or there's three, some mix between the two. Sometimes you should initiate them, sometimes you shouldn't, right? And in my paper on this topic, I show that, first of all, jungle ethic, jungle law, it reduces into whim worship, which reduces into a whim epistemology, which reduces into the primacy of consciousness. But the primacy of consciousness is a stolen concept fallacy, because consciousness is consciousness of existence, right? So you can't have consciousness as the root. And then, so law of the jungle is out, right? Easy to use, right? Most people don't agree with that. Then we move on to mixed law. Mixed law also fails on the same grounds, because it reduces into either, well, it's fine when the dictator says it's fine, or whenever this class says it's fine. The class-based ethic has its own proof against it. But yeah, it also reduces into whim epistemology, and therefore the primacy of consciousness. So then we're left with only the NEP as our only remaining option. And then everything else follows from that. In my course on libertarian ethics, I just get to the NEP. And once I have the NEP, everything else I build up from the NEP. Homestead theory, I get it from the NEP. Property rights, I get it from the NEP. Everything I'm getting from the NEP. That's all you need. And so there isn't just, we can just choose however we want to do it. No, the other answers to law are incorrect. They don't make any sense. They're stolen concepts.
I mean, you're kind of just referencing that you've already disproven that we could do a
I can link the
societal
paper if you want.
determination of
I'll link
ownership.
the fucking paper then.
You're implying that you've already. Well, yeah.
I'll
linking
link
the paper doesn't mean you've actually shown it's impossible to be. Linking it doesn't prove you're right.
It's a pretty long paper. It's a pretty long paper. I can't go over the entire proof in a Discord VC. You're just gonna have to, I suppose, take my word for it, right? But you can read the paper.
I don't take your word for it.
Okay, well then, fuck you, right? It doesn't matter. I don't care that you don't take my word for it. Read the paper.
I mean,
if you disagree with it, write a rejoinder.
If your position is correct and then reference your own paper, then okay.
Write a fucking rejoinder then. There you go. I linked it in the VC text. Read that paper and tell me the flaw.
If you can't argue your own position in VC, I mean, I guess there's
I already
nothing for us to
fucking
talk
gave the
about.
argument
If you're just
for
going
it.
to keep
Which
referencing
point?
your paper.
Jesus Christ!
No,
which
you just
point?
referenced that you've already disproved.
Which parts do you disagree with specifically?
I disagree that societal determination of ownership and society setting conflict avoiding norms is like some sort of contradiction or not possible or doesn't make sense, as you said.
Which specific part is that? Is it jungle ethic, mixed law? Which is it?
He never made a point. He just referenced paper that he has written and then said that he
whole argument.
All right, you're gone. All right, come to me with some criticism of that paper, because I'm not reading the entire paper on stream right now. Like, it's not happening. Like, I can do a word count on it if you want. It's pretty long, 13 pages long.
Even
in a
ignoring the
PDF.
paper. Ignoring the paper, right? Like, you made an argument before you linked the paper. The argument was that if you select either Law of the Jungle or a mixed law system, then you enter into a contradiction because you don't have a consistent theory here, right? You end up saying conflict is okay in some situations, but not in other situations, and there's no way to consistently adjudicate that. You have to appeal to some whim, some consciousness, which doesn't have any basis.
And yeah, that's basically, the paper just expands on that greatly, right? And that's why I linked it to him. So yeah, he can fucking write a rejoinder if he wants to. And I'm not reading the whole fucking thing on stream. Like, I think that would be quite boring. Oh shit, this Danny Cat guy, he keeps giving me money.
Yeah,
I'm loving it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Danny Cat.
Let's see. He says he's going to accept the win because you muted him. That's ridiculous.
Well, he can do what he wants. He was already lying about me before,
I've
saying
got
that
a
I
few
was dodging a
questions on
debate with him.
property.
So, go on.
Excuse me, can I ask some questions about property rights?
Sure.
So property is basically when you exclude others from accessing something, right?
Specifically, it's the right to exclude. And this is Deyasay's interpretation of property.
Okay. I'm wondering, let's say you misplace your phone somewhere in public. How, if someone comes along it, how do they know whether it's owned by someone or not?
So you would use, basically, the way you deal with such a scenario is social norms. Like, I understand that people generally aren't leaving their phone out and then I can take it. But if they left it in like, hey, here's a free phone box, and it's like, oh yeah, people are leaving free phones out, right? But if somebody's like left their phone somewhere, I understand that they've just dropped it, right? So I'm going to go, okay, let's look at this phone, let's see if there's any contacts in it that I can call and be like, hey, this person has left their phone out here, you know? Or go to their mum contact or whatever, right?
What if you find like a phone lost in the forest and you don't know the password to open it and you don't know who it belongs to? What do you do then? Do you have a right to? Should you be returning it to its owner, or should you just leave it there, or do you have a right to like take it for yourself?
Well, so like maybe there's a it's out in the forest, right? It might be on a hiking trail, so you could take it down to like the lodger's hut or whatever it is, right? And you'd be like, hey, somebody left their phone out there. And you try and get it back. But if there's just nobody there to claim it, right? Maybe in the meantime, a nuclear war has happened and everybody else has died. Then, like, clearly, all right, this person's never coming back. You know, like
honestly, Zulu, I would take the phone to the police station because I think you should probably check the missing persons report for the missing hiker who dropped their phone in the woods.
Yeah, there you
and
go.
was eaten by a cannibal.
And like this is
Okay,
like
thanks.
what happens with like sort of applying property norms in actual situations is you have to use judgment, you have to investigate the situation.
Investigate.
Like, it's not as clean as the scenarios I'll give in like my course or in debates or whatever, right? You have to figure it out. You have to try and apply, and that's where courts come in. They come in trying to apply these objective norms to some specific muddy situation, because the real world is very muddy all the time, right? It's not entirely obvious who owns a given thing. Like, that's why property borders are so important. So you can see, hey, look, this person has a title to this land and it defines it in this area, and I can see there's a fence there, you know? That's why that's so important.
Yeah, I would say, I think, like, touching on your point about how stuff isn't always clear, it's like this whole debate, like, to me, like, this debate has been going on for ages. Obviously, like, Hopper's been, like, made his case for restricted immigration and free trade ages ago, right? And Block responded to it ages ago. And the reason it's flared up so
Your mic's getting a bit, like, muddy. Your mic's getting, like, a bit, like...
Your mic is muddy. You sound like you're underwater.
Oh, sorry. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's better.
Is that better? Yeah, sure. The only reason it's flared up so significantly is because of Dave's just like openly hostile rhetoric from the word go. Like, obviously, as
belligerent,
his initial comment on Clint Russell's podcast or whatever it was that kind of sparked all this was like calling us all communists and Nazis for supporting open borders, which is like so ironic given if you actually look at the Nazis and communist border policies, I think you'd find it wasn't exactly free immigration in those countries, right? So I just like, it's just such a weird situation we've got ourselves in when clearly there is like some uncertainty around how this actually pans out. But the idea that we need to be so hostile to one another about it is just absolutely absurd. Like, I think we got the correct case, but I didn't want to come in here and be all hostile about it in this conversation. But I feel like I have been at various points, primarily by Dave, and that other people have just stepped up and defended it, like Bob Murphy.
Yeah, like, sort of, the lie that we're being fed here is that we just all can't, like Dave was just saying, hey, we shouldn't have heroin addicts shooting up heroin in a girl's bathroom. That's bad. And that's all he said, was just it's bad that happens. It's like, no, he said take our entire fucking military and put them on our fucking border and secure our border. And that's what people were getting pissed off about. Right? They weren't getting pissed off that you were saying it's bad that heroin addicts are shooting. Like, that's a reductio case. Right? Yeah, I agree. It's bad that happens. But he was going almost in the other direction. I could imagine, like, a year ago, I might use that as reductio for closed borders. It's like, well, what would happen if you took the entire US military and put them on the southern border? Like, people would be like, yeah, that's ridiculous. That's insane. But no, this is just his actual stated opinion on the matter now. And that's why people were getting mad at him. And it's just completely not said. And people keep gaslighting me. Multiple times I've been gaslighted on Twitter that no, I'm strawmanning him when I'm saying that he wants to put the entire military on the border. He said that verbatim.
He said that point blank, and it's like, if he wants to walk that back and say, I was just in the heat of the moment, then by all means, but he hasn't. Like, and yeah, it's crazy, and I had something else I wanted to say. I've just lost it. Someone else can jump in, but I had something to say. I've just completely lost it.
All right, well, Ace, do you want to go over the title transfer argument, that there isn't a chain of title transfer linking the property owner to, like, the taxpayer to, like, a public park or whatever?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, sort of, you know, in Hoppe's analysis, right? I don't have his words right in front of me. I could pull it up, but Hoppe's basic argument is obviously that we should not just treat the public property that the state claims as just virgin land, right? And that the taxpayers who have been expropriated have a claim in this land because their tax money has gone to maintain it. One of the problems that I've seen with this argument, I think, is that essentially, like, if you and I are right, so there's a very common argument where, like, if someone steals money from me and then they go and they purchase something with that stolen money, let's assume that that's the only money they have, just for, you know, ease of the argument. And they buy, like, a bicycle, right, with my money. It's not the case that I would own the bike. The reason why is because when the thief used that money to pay for the bike, that was a fraudulent purchase. He had no right to use the money to make the purchase, and the bike owner thought that he would be the owner of the money in exchange for transferring the bike, but he is not the actual owner. So in both these cases, the bike would essentially default to the bike owner's shop. Like, no transactions actually made. Fraudulent transaction, no title goes through, right? So in that case, because the state doesn't own anything, like, they have no actual legitimate title, every single quote-unquote transaction they make is fraudulent by default. But every single one. So the state can't just, like, transfer a title, like, even in a restitution sense. The state cannot, like for example, if someone goes and they, like, burn down my house or something, in normal restitution theory, it's acceptable, generally speaking, for you to say, okay, well, I'm going to take some of the arsonist's property as restitution for mine, and that makes sense. But when you apply that to the state, there's a disanalogy coming up, because the state doesn't actually own any property in order for that restitution to actually occur. They don't own any of it. So it can't be the claim that just because the state controls this land, that it's theirs to transfer to the victim. It's not. It's either privately owned by a specific person who we can like objectively ascertain, or it's unowned. And if it's unowned, the state there's no title there for the state to transfer as restitution to the taxpayer. Is the essential argument.
It's sort of like, imagine a guy was just straight up forestalling something, because that's what the state's doing with these public possessions, right? They're forestalling.
Yeah.
Like he just stops people from getting into some forest that he doesn't own. He just shoots them on sight.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, this guy has stolen something from someone. Would it be justifiable to take some of that forest and use it as restitution? No, because the guy doesn't own it. How do they come into ownership of this thing? The victim, that is. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you can't come into ownership of something. Like, it has to be homesteaded first. You can't homestead via restitution. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Right. And you can logically homestead something by exclusion, by excluding people first. You get the right to exclude people through homesteading. So logically, it can't come before the other.
But don't you understand, Ace, despite all that, what if a heroin addict goes into a public school? What the
Right. Yeah. Well, that's why I asked Dave. Originally is that, okay, because Dave brought up the net taxpayer thing. He's like, well, the heroin addict or whatever isn't a net taxpayer. He brought that up in his reply. I wasn't the one who brought that up. And then when I asked, okay, well, what if he is? Would that be okay? Right? Because he's an owner, right? And Dave said no. It's like, okay, well, where are you basing your argument on? You keep like jumping from argument to argument, so you can't be pinned down.
That has been the other point that I've been on. Is like he just hops around and makes different arguments depending on the context. And the frustrating part about both of the actual interviews he's done in the last, obviously he did the one on the Christian Institute and then the Bob Murphy one. Both times, the people that he was debating in inverted commas against was they would put forward a weak source version of our argument, and then he would give his reply, and they'd be like, oh, okay, fair enough. Anyway, next argument. They're not willing to actually, they wouldn't actually push him on it and actually make him explicate his theory properly. He would just say, oh, well, this is he would just they would give him an argument for open borders, and he would think up, okay, what's the best counter argument for this specific case, make that counter argument. Whether he'd made it before, whether it would didn't matter how vague it was, didn't matter if it contradicted a different argument he'd made prior. And they go, okay, fair enough, that's a fair enough response. And then that was that. That's not a debate. That's just people letting you just throwing you softballs and letting you hit them out of the park, as if that somehow proves anything.
And our arguments keeping strawman is if we're saying everyone has a right to this property, right? Everyone, which is not, Zulu's never said that. Certainly, I've never said that, and you've never said that.
Yeah,
so
it's actually worse than that. It's a complete inversion of our actual stance. Our stance is no, nobody owns that property. Not that everybody owns it and everybody can just do whatever they want with it.
Yeah.
No, nobody owns it because we don't think that group property is a thing.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
And he has. He's like, oh well, some people are saying it's unowned. But he's lumping that together with everybody owns it, as if that's the same thing. And it's like, well, no, it's completely different. The outcomes from that would be completely different. The logic behind that is completely different. And as the Zulu has been at pains to explain to multiple people just in this VC, collective property we understand to be a contradiction. So no, obviously we're not arguing that everyone owns this property. In fact, Dave Smith is probably the one that's arguing maybe not everyone, but at least multiple people own this in the form of the taxpayers.
Yeah. And, what's funny, this is something that I think it doesn't get brought up enough, but specifically in Stephen Kinsella's formulation of Hoppe's arguments, Kinsella argues that essentially, this is essentially restitution for the aggression of being a taxpayer, right? Is that they get a share of public property. It's very interesting that under that argument, there's a certain conclusion that closed border libertarians in general would not like, which is that a lot of millions, perhaps, of Middle Eastern people would have a right to the property in the United States because they have suffered aggression from the United States government. The aggression doesn't just happen domestically, it happens overseas. So under that specific foundation, it would justify quote unquote hordes, right, of people coming into the country and having a right to that public property. Now, obviously, that's not my argument. I don't believe that at foundation, but that is the conclusion if you buy into public owner or group ownership and Kinsella's argument. That is a conclusion of that.
I don't know if this would work rhetorically because he would
Thank you
probably
for the
just
$4.99
avoid
big
answering
guy.
it. But I wonder what would happen if you just point blank asked Dave Smith in a debate. So, all else being equal, should we or should we not abolish ICE? Just point blank ask him, because his argument necessitates making the case that a libertarian should, all else equal, demand a greater level of government restriction or a greater level of government activity than otherwise. And he would probably just weasel his way out of it somehow, saying, "Oh, that's I don't know, just a bad bait." I don't know. He would find some way to weasel out of it. I'm not sure, but that's what I bet he would do. But that's genuinely the case that he's making. It's that all else being equal, the government should do more than do less. It's well, how can you possibly argue that that's a libertarian position, just point blank? I get that there's sometimes we have to make this counterintuitive arguments that we make as libertarians, but none of them involve the first conclusion being, well, yeah, all else being equal, there should be more government than less.
And it's hard because, it's hard because Dave tap dances between different arguments to justify his conclusion. So sometimes when you'll be tackling one argument, he'll switch on you and then try to say that, well, that's not what I'm arguing. It's that's not what you're arguing now. But if you can't make your argument clearly, then I have to tackle kind of all possible ways you could reach your conclusion. It's interesting too. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I want to add something in here that also completely went unnoticed. So they love emphasizing on this sentence, oh, these open border teenagers, they want hobos, junkies, snorting cocaine in girls' bathrooms, and they love using this sentence. But when we confront them with the logical conclusion of, their premise, which is horrific premise, taxpayers gets to decide by the will of the people, even though he used this word, he tried to gaslight into thinking that he never meant it, but we do have video. It's yes, they literally said taxpayers have a superior claim over this property, therefore we can use the will of the people to decide what we're going to do with it. So when we confronted him, okay, with this logic, we can justify gun restrictions, mask mandates, we can justify basically anything if the will of the people decides it. And he never responds to this argument. He doesn't understand the insanity of the thing he defends, but he loves going against the open borders argument, oh, you guys want junkies in girls' bathrooms. Well,
he actually
here's the thing. His logical conclusion leads to that too, because what if the local taxpayers were a bunch of pedophile drug addicts and they actually voted and asked to have junkies in girls' bathrooms? His conclusion leads to the same thing.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, I don't know if you saw his response to me when I confronted him about that on Twitter, but he basically said no, they wouldn't have that right. So he based his argument on the net taxpayer theory and then switched it when it came to a conclusion he didn't.
That's the thing. He constantly baits and switches. He says one thing and then he immediately switches to something else. It's impossible to argue with him. And when you tell him no, this is what you said, he straight up denies it. And it's very hard to debate on Twitter because it's hard to find where he said the things he said. It's not like Discord. It's harder to research it, which is very annoying. That's why I've been keep saying I need a Dave Smith folder where I have shots of his videos and tweets. So when he denies something, when he gaslights me, I'm like, there it is. You did say it.
It's not even a Morton Bailey, because I don't even think one argument is better than the other. It's a Bailey and Bailey. It's he keeps shifting between different
Just hop from one
Baileys.
to the other.
Yeah, he's just running in a circle between like 8 different Baileys. It's like, well, which one do you hold to?
I think the Mott and Bailey is a still effective comparison of what's going on. They see it. They see the whole changing it from immigration to talking about crackheads in schools. That's their Mott. They're treating it exactly like a Mott. And I think the analogy does hold, even if the Mott can still be attacked. But they think that the Mott is invincible, and they chortle every time someone confronts them on it. And I think we just gotta figure out why and respond accordingly.
I just think it's funny that Dave, like point blank, said in that Jacob Weinograd podcast that he's not going to debate any of us because he would wipe the floor with us. That's like pretty much what he said, or that he would wreck us or something. When pretty much what he's done in both the podcasts that he's been on is answer fucking weak source questions from people who don't seem to actually disagree with him despite what they say, and who have given him softball questions, and after his response just said, yeah, that's fair enough. We'll move on to the next argument.
Yeah. None of them have actually
literally
pushed
what he's
back
done
on Dave. And
both of his conversations.
And in that podcast, he kept being like, oh, this Ace Arcus guy, he's at least reasonable, but Zulu, he's insane. He's crazy. And we're making the same fucking argument. I don't think there's a single thing on this topic that me and Ace disagree on. Right? We're making the same argument. He's like, Ace, his argument is at least reasonable, but Zulu, he's crazy. It's like, what? He can't abstract beyond like just basically the fucking like the presentation. Like this is why I figured out
you're a bit more.
Yeah, I'm more inflammatory,
more
definitely
brash
and
in the way
like,
you go about it. But that's literally the only difference.
This is confirmed by this Twitter space we just had, where Jake Lloyd, I think that's his name. Sorry if I messed up the first name. He comes on and he's giving like the same like, no, you can't have a group property right. But he dresses it up with some other like stuff about unschooling and stuff. And he's like, yeah, I basically agree with all of that. And you said, he made the same argument. What are you talking about?
It's because he kind of says it in a nice way. You do have it, like, you're doing it in a correct way, but you do have a debater style where it's more like attacking the opponent's weakness. That's your debate style. And
you're confronting them.
People are aware that you are the one controlling the argument, and they're irritated by that. They don't want someone else to control their argument and point out their inconsistencies. They want someone else to be constantly in defense.
Well, Jack simply wasn't debating. I don't know what he was doing up there, but he just simply wasn't debating.
He was also not debating. But I think the difference between Ace and you, Ace is more of a person explaining his position. Your debate style is more like, I'm going to prove the inconsistencies of yours. And people just don't like to be, when their inconsistencies are shown up to their face. They just don't like that. They get upset about it.
Yeah, that's probably true, and that's conscious on my part, because I like to because I'm not trying to, whenever I'm doing a debate, for the most part, sometimes I'll talk to someone and I'm trying to convince them. But for the most part, I am trying to just show, hey, look how retarded this person is. Look how silly they are. Look how stupid they are. And then my audience is going, well, if they're on the margin, they're like, well, I don't want to be like agreeing with the stupid guy here. I want to be agreeing with the smart guy. And then they're going to shift over to me. Like, it's a conscious strategy, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, highlighting the contradictions, I think, is super beneficial to your audience. I think your emphasis on, hey, this is a contradiction, you must resolve it. That puts it on display for everybody to understand. That's a good thing for sure. Whether it's just a matter of getting some points to feel good about, or just benefiting others, it's a good thing, I'll say.
Yeah. At this point, the only way this debate can move one step further is if Dave Smith agrees to have a stream with someone like Ace or Zulu, and then just gets into it in good faith and actually bothers to, listen to the opposite side. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think he will. No. I'm convinced that is not going to happen the moment he did that stream with that Nobody Christian Libertarian podcast. Is that the name?
Yeah.
I think that's the name.
The Libertarian Christian Institute, I think is what it's called.
Yeah. Accepted to do a stream with that literally Nobody account, way less relevant than Zulu or Ace. So at this point, it's very opposite that he wants a controlled opposition, like Bob Murphy. Which is when I watched Bob Murphy stream, I felt like you guys know how like when journalists do interviews with third world presidents, it's a complete controlled opposition, and the journalist larps as an opposition, but in reality, he's like working for the president. I literally felt like I'm watching something like that.
I mean, they even said so as much. Like 40 minutes into the interview, he's like, "Yeah, I've been kind of softballing this whole time. Maybe I should actually try to put you in a wind tunnel." But the wind tunnel was more like a slight breeze.
No.
Yeah.
I think is kind of. I was at first giving him the benefit of the doubt. I was like, no, maybe he's not like scared to debate. That's just childish to think. I think it's because Zulu is not relevant enough. But now I'm convinced that he's aware that he's going to be destroyed if he does.
Yeah.
He doesn't identify as like a smart thought leader. He always defers to other libertarian intellectuals who are more academic. But then on this area, he kind of just says, "Well, I'll point to Hoppe, and then I'm also then smarter than all the nobodies."
And we've seen exactly what happens with this space when these people actually do debate me. They end up denying the law of the excluded middle, and they're completely incapable of dealing with any arguments, and they have to remove me from the space. Like, this is what happens, and he's correct that I would indeed annihilate him if he were ever to get on a debate with me, which is why he refuses. He keeps like he will respond to like the most dumb fuck like meme of mine, but then he won't come in and actually answer. He will strategically not answer the part of my tweet where it's like, okay, well, how do you resolve the contradiction of group property rights? And he's like, well, what about this other part of the tweet? And it's like, well, how about the group property right? How do you resolve that contradiction? It's a contradiction. Resolve it.
That's been every single interaction I've had with him on this entire topic. He will see me, at him in a post that I make. He will drop in, like, either quote tweet me or reply with some zinger where he's like, you're just so stupid. Like, how could you possibly think this? And then when I reply to him, it's like, okay, let's walk through the logic here, or try and make an actual substantive argument, or respond to something that he said. Oh, he's gone all of a sudden. All of a sudden, he can't see my notifications or something. I don't know. Or he just doesn't have the time all of a sudden. But then next time I make a post, I've got another chance to drop some kind of zinger. I'm back. It's just, yeah.
I was very disappointed when Kinsella. By the way, I do think Kinsella and Bob Murphy are intelligent individuals. I read their stuff. That those are things written by intelligent individuals. But I was really disappointed when Kinsella agreed with Dave Simmons' hypothetical, even though, as we already have spoken, the hypothetical doesn't respond to anything.
Oh, yeah, that wasn't great by Kinsella that he defended what was it? Did he defend the park one? I think he defended the park analogy as being relevant.
Analogy doesn't follow anything. That's the issue.
To be fair to Kinsella, he did actually engage for a little bit on the group property problem. It's very possible that he just didn't get through the whole thing, right? Because he followed me on Twitter afterwards, so maybe he agrees, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he hasn't done a full controlled opposition. He hasn't done a full controlled opposition podcast where he's giving Dave a bunch of softball bullshit, right? He just kind of dipped in and then dipped out immediately, which fine, whatever,
It is possible that he didn't even know the details of the debate. He hasn't seen the debate on Twitter, so he just saw surface level, and he checked the podcast and he thought, oh, this is the argument that these kids are making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did Kinsella say something about collective group property of interest?
He engaged with me for a little bit, but he just he dipped out very quickly. But fine, whatever. He hasn't. The difference there is that he hasn't been engaging constantly and then conveniently dipping out the second this contradiction comes up. He just hasn't been engaging with the debate at all, right? He's just been doing his own thing, which fine, whatever, do your own thing. I don't. That's not a problem. The problem is when you conveniently can't answer this one question, and then you can do all your dunks all day, you're on there all day doing the dunks, but then you can't answer this one question. Like that doesn't describe Kinsella. That describes a lot of these other guys.
Yeah, I think it is noteworthy that, like, on Twitter, Dave Smith appeals to, well, that's crazy, and whatever common sense is, according to Dave Smith, like, all the time. He doesn't like to engage in the actual arguments. He just likes to point and say, that's stupid.
No, he likes to bait and switch. That's what he likes to do. He likes to deny what he has said, and then he likes to say something that is, a complete bait. And then once you, confront him about it, he completely is like, well, that's not what I actually said. This is what I actually said. And it's the complete opposite of what he actually said. And he does this all the time. All the time. It's impossible to debate with him over Twitter. It has to be on live, so he cannot do the bait and switch. It will be in front of everyone.
Oh yeah, like regarding that that last Twitter space, the whole idea of a couple owning a house, I feel like I could describe that concept way better than Jacob was getting across there. Because really, like, it's not going to be the pure idea of one person can do anything they want with that piece of property because there is another person. But when conflicts come up, I think a good source of inspiration for what a libertarian order would look like would actually be inspired by English common law. I don't know how much everyone in here has researched that or is familiar with that idea, but that I think common law is a good source for getting an idea of, well, what happens when libertarian property theory meets the road with all the different kinds of cases that can come up. And so I don't know what the current legal standard is based on that for when a couple is arguing over painting walls in a house. But I think legally, if you were to try to take it to court, each person that owns the house can paint it however they want. So they can just paint over each other over and over again. That's just what the law says about that kind of thing. But on the other hand,
It's not natural law. That's a failure. That's a failure of law.
well, it's a compromise when you enter into, because normally you have to enter into a joint ownership of something. It's never just impressed onto you. But on the other hand, there are other things that require the consent of all of the owners, like selling the house. So, it's worth doing more research, obviously, because I haven't double checked these sort of ways to resolve these conflicts when group ownership happens. But I think it's worth checking out what the English common law tradition has to say about that, and how that has been applied in the United States, and how that can be a source of inspiration for what libertarian law would look like.
Practically speaking, what would have to happen is you would have a single owner, but they would enter into contractual relationships with other people, right? And the contract would state, under these conditions, if this obligation has failed to be met, then ownership of this building reverts to another person, right? Or we have a decision-making process over which, these sorts of decisions are made. We vote or whatever, right? And the owner is still the owner, but the contract says if this vote fails to pass, or if this vote passes but the owner attempts to stop it, then they give up their ownership status to this next person in the list, right? And that's still a single owner, right? You're resolving the conflict, but there is still a single owner, and they have contractually stated that they would hand over ownership to a different person under these conditions, right? So that's the libertarian answer to that, right?
So I've got a question. So one, I want to know why Lego was server muted, because I feel like he was just asking a valid question. Two, under common law, English or American common law,
No, I'm not using either of those.
I think we should unmute Lego because I think he had some good responses.
Right,
But under
and
common law,
if he wants to debate me
you have
and
to
have a debate with Lego, then we can do it. Right, I can go over the whole paper if it's in a debate with Lego. But right now, it's not a debate with Lego about this. It's about
surely you
the
have a
open borders
specific
topic.
argument within the paper. Surely you have a specific argument within the paper.
Yes, I gave that argument, right? But right now, we're just talking about open borders, okay?
Yeah, but so common law
Right, server mute. Okay, we're just talking about open borders here. It's a post-debate discussion on the open borders stance. Okay? That's what we're discussing here. We're not discussing anything else. I know Lego's been trying to debate me for a while, but he hasn't found the time. Apparently he's online at this point, right? So find the time, DM me the time you want to debate me, and we can set something up, and I can debate you on whatever it is you want. Alright? But not right now. Pick a different fucking time.
But yeah, my final point about the
match.
Let's do a boxing match, yeah. We'll do it at Property and Freedom Society.
But the rules are you have to be
right
geared up. And you have to be wearing gloves. I'm not going to have gloves though, so that's the rules. That's
Gloves are actually a
but yeah, as it
benefit,
relates
so I'll go for
to
that, yeah.
borders. Sorry, I keep talking over people.
Or go ahead.
Or if you don't want to do it, you can send Eduardo in your place, and he's just executed. We don't even do a boxing match. We just execute.
I'm strong enough, bro. I got you.
Eduardo will be my champion.
No, it doesn't matter. We just shoot you in the back of the head. That's it.
Sorry, Eduardo. I'm a selfish man. I'm gonna go for it.
Wait, the human shield.
Yeah.
Kind of scenario.
I have a question.
Okay.
So yeah, if common law is a way to handle like a couple jointly owning a house, that doesn't apply to the open borders versus closed borders debate. The taxpayers are joint owners of the public land. Well, that doesn't work. Common law can't fix that. So it being a mot to the closed border folks, like, that's just got to be destroyed. Because, yeah, a couple can own a house, but that doesn't justify closing the border through some even vaguer notion of collective property ownership. Same with corporate shares as well, but that works a bit differently based on contracts. But there's no contracts with the Hoppian notion of taxpayers are joint owners of the public land.
Well, surely it's the social contract, right? Hop social contract theorists be like, when you sign the social contract, now we get to expropriate your house to turn it into a border outpost, so we can stop the illegals.
Oh yeah, there's the whole eminent domain concern, and like the bordertarians, they need to be nailed on that, and I've been forgetting to nail them on that. Like, what the heck? We're for expropriating people along the border in order to make the wall or whatever.
Sorry, hang on. I just want to clarify something here. Are you nailing Dave Smith, or is like Dave Smith nailing you? Like, how's this going down?
Yeah, who's the top?
I watched Zulu's video that he made about Dave Smith. It was Dave Smith knows how to take a nailing by the sounds of it.
Many such cases. Nobody's nailing Zulu. Not on my watch.
Eduardo's the only person allowed to nail Zulu.
Eduardo is my husband.
Zulu, I have a question.
Go on.
Will he let you paint the wall, though?
All right. So a point that
Women aren't allowed to paint walls.
Hold on. Let Paladin go.
If only. Okay. So a point that Libertarian Christian brought up, if only implicitly, was that, well, the government makes claims to be a just provider of certain services, and it sets standards for itself in providing those services, such as promoting the general welfare, providing for due process, speedy trials, border security, regulating who comes and goes across certain property boundaries. So if the state is going to make these claims to service provision, if it will set out these standards for itself in providing these services? And should we not, as taxpayers who have no choice in paying for these services, hold the state accountable to the standards it sets for itself? As to say, look, Washington, if you're going to take our money and provide these services, then, and hey, you're not meeting the standards you set for yourself, then, you know, get back on the program that you made. You know, like, what would you say to that?
So basically, the fundamental question when it comes to law is, do they have the right to prevent people from going there? Do they have the right to control how that property is used? And the answer on libertarianism is no, they don't have that right. So it's definitely contradictory when they don't meet their own standards. I agree there, right? That is indeed a contradiction that they're holding. But that does not imply that they should therefore go ahead and meet those standards. It's a lot like people will be like, well, it's unfair that, you know, maybe men are being prosecuted more in child court than women. So we should equalize the prosecution and have men and women equally prosecuted. It's like, no, because fairness is definitely required if you're a virtuous man and you're going to have integrity. But fairness is not a libertarian virtue. If one person is being stolen from, the solution isn't to steal an equal amount from everybody. Yes, they are indeed contradicting themselves by only stealing from this one guy. Maybe they're only stealing from black people and not white people. But the solution there is that they stop stealing from the black people, not that they start stealing from the white people.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Dave does, like one of the things that these people are doing, I suppose, the Libertarian camp, is they're like, you know, we'll basically make the claim that, like, listen, our solution is the libertarian solution. And they're like, well, we don't disagree with that, but what about in the meantime? And it's like, well, and then when we say, well, we don't think that there is a good policy to take in the meantime that involves increasing the power of the state or increasing state oversight of a particular thing, and they'll go, so what about the breakfast hypothetical, right? Like, what if you didn't have breakfast this morning? How would you feel if you didn't have breakfast this morning? And it's like, well, like, these are slightly different cases. Like, we're basically just saying that according to libertarianism, there is no adequate solution to dealing with this issue other than abolishing the state or abolishing state control of borders. That is the position. There is no second best position that we should be advocating for. And the comparison I've made is, well, should we advocate for a second best solution to, foreign policy in the US? Should we advocate for trying to kill half as many Middle Eastern children as we currently do? Like, is that going to be an adequate solution to Dave Smith? And I would think he would say, of course not. So why should we accept a second best solution when it comes to this issue?
Well, Libertarian Christian did appeal at multiple points to the Constitution and how the government has blatantly overreached the bounds that the Constitution sets for government authority. And while he said that, of course, the Constitution so status, it would surely be a far more beneficial state of being to have a government restricted to what the Constitution actually says than the government as it is now. So, as ideal as a stateless, free, open market society would be, is it not viable to at least call the state out when it so abrogates the standards set for itself and appeal to the state restraining itself to the standards it's supposed to be as? You know, this is the appeal that I hear from Libertarian Christian and from Smith to a certain extent, it seems. Like, would you still say that's an illegitimate appeal to, like, holding the state to its own standards?
Sorry, it seems like there's a silence there, so what would be the upshot of that? I was dealing with some other stuff in the meantime.
Oh, are you responding to me?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, this is really incrementalist argument. That, look, the constitutional government is better than the government as we have now that so abrogates the Constitution. And is it not viable to point to the state and say, hey, you're not even putting yourself to the standards that you set for yourself? Like, is that not a viable criticism to lob?
I mean, it's a fine enough criticism, but it doesn't do much because it's sort of implicitly accepting the premise that, well, if they did follow their own rules, then it would be fine. It would be all right to use that criticism against like a minarchist who's maybe saying, well, we just need a constitution to limit the state. It's like, well, no, the state doesn't get limited by a constitution. We see that with the United States. It didn't get limited by a constitution. But in general, I would avoid such an argument because it's like, yeah, okay, the state's inconsistent, but we would also be against them if they were consistent, right? That isn't the fundamental problem with the state. The fundamental problem is what they're trying to do is evil.
Yes, in fact, that reminds me that just today I got a letter from my county court jury service, and I was sent a letter by the judge who so kindly thanks me for being, in fact, let me grab it. I don't have it, but basically, in this letter from this judge, she says, it's because of citizens who are willing to devote their time to the justice system that makes our system work. And I just read that and I thought, willing? Like, it literally says in the post on the notice that if I don't go, I'm going to be thrown in prison. Like, willing? Just the gall of it.
Yeah, we get all sorts of stuff like that, where it is indeed, well, if we have the Constitution and then we all agree to the Constitution, then it's fine. It's like, no, we're not agreeing to the Constitution. It's not fine. You can't agree for other people, right?
Yeah, this is the strangest part about their position, because it's like, well, sure, if we all agree, then, it's happy-go-lucky, but then law is supposed to be dealing with when we don't agree. So what do we do when we don't agree? And the group ownership just doesn't solve that.
Someone was talking about jury duty in court there, and I just want to say, as someone who has been involved in my local magistrates court in a employment capacity for quite a while, or was at one point, however bad you think courts are under the state, they are significantly worse. They are so bad. It is actually amazing to sit back and witness what goes on in courts under the state. Just the arbitrariness of the rulings. I was talking to Eduardo one evening about it, and I made the point that defense lawyers will walk in with their clients and literally see who the judge is and then ask for an adjournment to a later date because they know that this judge is particularly harsh when it comes to, say, drink driving laws, which obviously we all understand shouldn't be a thing in the first place. But just sit back and think for a moment that someone's, livelihood, whether they get to keep their job, how long they're off the road for, how long they can't drive for, totally hinges on one justice's personal opinion when it comes to that specific set of laws. Like, that is if you actually just think back and think about that, that is actually insane that how well, or the outcome that you get from a legal proceeding is contingent upon a judge's personal feelings towards you or towards the crime. Like, that is just insane to me, that people will just accept that and say, yeah, that seems fair. Like, but there's no other better system that I can think of than the judge's arbitrary whim when it comes to the outcome of a specific legal case. It's just, it's mind-boggling. But people just accept it and just deal with it. It's, crazy.
Yeah, it makes me think of back in my country, they're dealing with cases like rape or child rape. And I think some of them got like 5 years,
France?
15 years the most. No, the Bahamas. But only recently have they been raising the time in prison, and there's nothing we can really do because it's up to the judge and whatever arbitrary law that the government decides. But with an objective law, we can actually have a sort of standard to go by rather than just state decree on how justice should be handled.
Even with a very concrete, like, libertarian natural law kind of thing, there is still a place for judges to function as ways to have a third party arbitrate any random dispute. But then also, when it comes to, like, deciding sentencing, when it makes sense to do that, that's the important part of being a judge, because I don't think you want a jury deciding sentencing most of the time.
Well, that's the other question that I've got for people is, like, if you, in a hypothetical ANCAP society, if we got what we wanted and you were deciding what kind of legal service or how you would want a potential dispute between you and someone else to be resolved, would anyone actually say, yeah, I want 12 random people to decide this? Like, would anyone actually say, yeah, that I think that's the best way to decide guilt or innocence, is 12 random people rock up and who may have zero understanding of the law, zero understanding of, the principles that we're applying, and they can decide whether I deserve restitution or not? Like,
yeah, that's a negative.
Yeah, I just think no. And yet we just, accept that. It's just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the jury is like an innovation of the time, which was back during the middle or height of the Enlightenment and I don't know the exact date, but like the 17th century or so, where the alternative was the government monopoly on judges, which wasn't great either. So
yeah,
just being slightly better than that is the only thing you could hope for. In a libertarian society, I believe most law between different groups of people would be based on mutually agreed upon third-party arbitrators.
Yeah, well, if it got to that point, like, I think most likely, how often does an insurance case actually go to court? Pretty much never.
Yeah, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, third-party private arbitrators already are like extremely dominant, at least here in the U.S. Like, I think a huge number of cases go to like third-party private arbitrators before they even go to court. And then even on top of that, there's also just court cases that are just negotiated between the two parties, even with a third party that isn't binding.
Well, as much as people will make the argument like Minikers say, will say, well, we need the backing of this. In a lot of cases, we already don't really have the backing of the state because neither party actually wants to go through a legal process that is A, very, very unpredictable, and B, prohibitively expensive to actually see through to the end. And so in most cases, well, first of all, what happens is if there's an imbalance in terms of, the victim and the defendant and the plaintiff's finances, like if one person or one company is dramatically richer than the other, well, they can use that to their advantage and just,
put them through, I don't know, what's it called, like slap or something, where you just like hit people with so much litigation that they can't afford to actually go through with the case, and they have to accept either no outcome or a suboptimal outcome. And then, but even in the case where, you know, people are relatively equal and then they have to come to some kind of agreement, they don't want to use the state because they have no idea what the outcome is going to be. They have to rely on most likely a jury of 12 randoms, and they have no idea what those people's personal beliefs are. And B, it's prohibitively expensive, and they'd rather just settle out of court, which is what happens in 99% of cases. Thereabouts, is it just gets settled out of court. So realistically, the state already, when it comes to a lot of civil cases, is barely necessary as it is. And yet we obviously have to fund it through our taxes.
Well, anyway, great discussion, guys. I'm going to head off now.
I've got a question regarding collective property. Not sure if it's appropriate to raise it now.
Just DM me or something.
Yeah.
Or you can ask the group here. But
I've got a question regarding an attempt.
All right. Whoop.